Socrates. Socrates, the classical Greek philosopher of Athens, remains an enduring symbol of wisdom through questioning. Born circa 470 BC, his life was devoted not to writing or public office, but to probing the moral and intellectual fabric of society. In a city bustling with democracy and civic debate, Socrates wandered the streets, engaging citizens in dialogue. He challenged the complacency of conventional knowledge, exposing contradictions, and prompting self-examination. His method, now eponymously known as the Socratic method, relied on relentless questioning rather than didactic instruction. At the heart of his philosophy lay the pursuit of virtue and the examined life. Socrates believed that true understanding begins with the acknowledgement of one's ignorance, and that wisdom is inseparable from ethical conduct. Knowledge, he asserted, must guide action, and living well is inseparable from thinking deeply. Yet, this life of inquiry was fraught with tension. Socrates' refusal to conform, his probing questions, and his critique of the powerful, unsettled Athens. Ultimately, he was tried and condemned to death on charges of corrupting youth and impiety, illustrating the conflict between individual conscience and societal norms. In the modern world, Socratic inquiry resonates in classrooms, courts, and public discourse. His insistence on questioning authority, examining beliefs, and pursuing ethical clarity inspires debates on truth, justice, and personal responsibility. Socrates' legacy is a reminder that wisdom is not a collection of answers, but a relentless engagement with questions. To live thoughtfully, courageously, and morally is to honor the spirit of Socratic inquiry, embracing the discomfort of uncertainty as the gateway to insight. Plato. Plato, the Athenian philosopher born circa 427 BC, stands as a towering figure in Western thought, a disciple of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle. His works, primarily in the form of dialogues, explore the depths of human knowledge, ethics, and the nature of reality, crafting a vision of a world governed by reason rather than mere opinion. Emerging from the intellectual ferment of classical Athens, Plato grappled with the political turmoil of his city, witnessing the execution of Socrates and the instability of democratic experimentations. This context shaped his profound inquiries into justice, virtue, and the ideal state, giving birth to the philosophical school of thought known as the Academy, where inquiry was as much about the soul as it was about society. At the core of Plato's philosophy lies the theory of forms, the notion that the material world is but a shadow of a higher, unchanging reality. Truth, for Plato, is not sensory but intellectual, attainable only through disciplined reason and philosophical contemplation. The allegory of the cave illustrates this, depicting the human journey from illusion to enlightenment, from ignorance to understanding. Yet tension arises between the ideal and the real. Plato's vision of philosopher kings and perfect justice contrasts sharply with the imperfections of human society. The gulf between aspiration and actuality challenges the philosopher to reconcile what ought to be with what is, questioning the feasibility of the ideal in practical governance. Today, Plato's reflections resonate in debates on ethics, politics, and education. The pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, the interrogation of moral absolutes, and the dialogue between reason and reality continue to guide contemporary thought and pedagogy. Ultimately, Plato invites each mind to ascend from shadow to light, urging a life devoted to truth, wisdom, and the ceaseless quest to understand the world beyond appearances. Aristotle. Aristotle, a towering figure of ancient philosophy, dissected the natural world with a meticulous curiosity, bridging abstract thought and tangible reality. Born in 384 BC in Stagira, his intellect became a beacon in the Academy of Plato and later in his own Lyceum, shaping the foundations of logic, ethics, and metaphysics. He observed that human beings possess an innate capacity for reason, situating virtue at the heart of a flourishing life. Ethics, for Aristotle, was not a system of rigid rules, but a study of habits and character, emphasizing the golden mean as a balance between excess and deficiency. Knowledge, he argued, emerges from experience, yet the intellect transcends mere observation, grasping universal truths embedded within particulars. At the core of his thought lies the pursuit of purpose, telos, as the defining principle of all things. Every entity, animate or inanimate, moves toward its fulfillment, and human beings actualize their essence through rational activity in harmony with virtue. Yet, this teleological framework encounters tension. The ideal of reasoned conduct often clashes with human passions and societal constraints, revealing the perennial struggle between potential and practice. Today, Aristotle's influence permeates science, politics, and education. Contemporary debates in ethics, artificial intelligence, and environmental philosophy echo his insistence on rational discernment and purpose-driven inquiry. His methodology, observing, categorizing, theorizing, remains a cornerstone of disciplined inquiry. In reflecting on Aristotle, we encounter a philosophy that demands engagement with life's complexity, urging us to cultivate wisdom, temper desire, and seek meaning not in abstract ideals alone, but in the lived exercise of reason. His legacy is an invitation to think deeply, act virtuously, and recognize that understanding the world begins with understanding ourselves. Pythagoras. Pythagoras, a figure shrouded in both history and legend, emerges from the mists of ancient Greece as a mathematician and philosopher whose ideas transcended numbers. He observed the world with a mind attuned to order, discovering that in right-angled triangles, the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. This was more than geometry. It was a revelation of hidden harmony. In a society where knowledge was fragmented between myth and observation, Pythagoras sought unity, a coherent system where logic could illuminate the cosmos. His theorem became a lens through which reality could be quantified, a bridge between tangible measurement and abstract reasoning. At its essence, the Pythagorean theorem embodies the principle that relationships define structure. Numbers are not mere symbols. They are the scaffolding of existence. In the careful balance of sides and angles, we glimpse the universe's intrinsic symmetry, an order that persists whether in the construction of temples or the vibrations of musical strings. Yet tension exists between abstraction and perception. Can the intangible certainty of a theorem capture the fluidity of lived experience? Pythagoras wrestled with this dichotomy, exploring how immutable truths coexist with the unpredictable chaos of human life. Today, his insights permeate architecture, physics, computer graphics, and even philosophy. Each use echoes his quest for harmony, reminding us that understanding is a lifelong dialogue between reason and observation. Ultimately, Pythagoras teaches that knowledge is not static. It is a pursuit of alignment, a meditation on the invisible patterns that shape reality. By tracing these patterns, we engage in a timeless conversation with the cosmos itself. Heraclitus. Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher from Ephesus, is remembered as the weeping philosopher, a figure who sought to uncover the hidden order behind the ceaseless flux of the universe. Living in a time of political turbulence and intellectual awakening, his thoughts emerged as a profound reflection on the impermanence that shapes all things. He observed that the world is in constant change, famously stating that one cannot step into the same river twice. For Heraclitus, reality is not a static collection of forms, but a dynamic process where opposites interact in tension, generating the harmony that sustains existence. Fire, ever transforming, became his emblem for the eternal flux and the transformative energy at the heart of life. This recognition of continual change presents a tension between stability and impermanence, provoking the question of how order can exist within chaos. By embracing the interplay of opposites, day and night, life and death, growth and decay, he challenged the human desire for permanence, revealing that true understanding requires acceptance of the world's fluidity. In modern times, Heraclitus' philosophy resonates in scientific and psychological paradigms alike. From the constant evolution observed in ecology and quantum physics to the inner transformations of the human psyche, his insights anticipate the reality that adaptation and flexibility are essential to survival and wisdom. Ultimately, Heraclitus invites a contemplation of life as a river, always moving, never static, and filled with paradox. By acknowledging the inevitability of change, one gains not despair, but clarity, a recognition that within the ceaseless flow lies the profound intelligence of the cosmos itself. Parmenides. Parmenides, a pre-Socratic philosopher from Elea in ancient Greece, stands as a cornerstone of metaphysical thought, asserting the primacy of being over becoming. His work, primarily known through the poem On Nature, challenges the superficiality of sensory perception, advocating reason as the true path to understanding reality. Emerging in a time when Greek thinkers were exploring natural phenomena and cosmology, Parmenides diverged sharply from his contemporaries. While Heraclitus emphasized perpetual change, Parmenides insisted that change is illusory and only the eternal, unchanging essence, what he called being, truly exists. This philosophical posture set the foundation for the discipline of ontology, influencing Plato, Aristotle, and the trajectory of Western philosophy. At the core of his argument lies a radical dichotomy between appearance and reality. The senses, Parmenides argued, deceive, presenting a world in flux, whereas rational contemplation reveals a singular, continuous, and indivisible existence. Being is timeless, uniform, and indivisible. Non-being is inconceivable. This position generates a profound tension. The undeniable flux of the world confronts the claim of immutable reality. How can one reconcile lived experience with the absolute unity of being? This paradox, while intellectually rigorous, invites continual philosophical inquiry and critical reflection on the limits of perception and thought. In the modern era, Parmenides' insistence on reason over sensation resonates in scientific and philosophical discussions about the nature of reality, from quantum mechanics' hidden structures to debates on consciousness. Ultimately, Parmenides challenges us to consider the possibility that beneath the chaotic surface of existence lies a constant, immutable truth, urging a disciplined, reflective approach to knowledge, where the mind seeks what the senses cannot grasp. Democritus. In the sunlit streets of ancient Abdera, a thinker pondered the unseen threads of existence. Democritus, often called the laughing philosopher, sought to understand the universe not through myth or divine decree, but through reason and observation. He proposed that all matter, no matter how diverse or complex, is composed of tiny, indivisible units, atoms, moving through the void, a concept so radical that it would echo faintly through millennia. This vision emerged from a time steeped in oral tradition and myth, where the natural world was explained through gods and spirits. Against this backdrop, Democritus's insistence on an atomic structure was audacious, a leap toward a reality governed by inherent order rather than caprice. His observations hinted at determinism, yet he tempered them with ethical reflection, believing that understanding the cosmos could cultivate tranquility and moderation in human life. At its core, his philosophy grappled with the paradox of the infinite and the minute, the boundless universe composed of countless atoms, each imperceptible, yet collectively giving rise to everything perceptible. This duality challenged thinkers to reconcile the simplicity of atomic motion with the richness of the world we inhabit. Yet tension lingered between certainty and speculation. Without experimental proof, Democritus relied on reasoning alone, navigating the fragile boundary between insight and imagination. His ideas were seeds in fertile soil, often overlooked, yet persistently germinating through philosophical discourse. Today, the resonance of his vision is unmistakable. Modern science, from particle physics to cosmology, validates the notion that invisible constituents shape observable reality. The philosopher who once laughed at human folly reminds us, profound understanding demands curiosity, patience, and the courage to perceive the imperceptible. Epicurus. Epicurus, born in 341 BC on the island of Samos, remains a seminal figure in the philosophy of pleasure and human tranquility. He founded a school known as the Garden, where simplicity, friendship, and rational thought formed the pillars of a serene life. His writings, though partially lost, profoundly influenced the understanding of desire, fear, and the pursuit of contentment. Amid the turbulence of Hellenistic Greece, where political upheaval and existential uncertainty prevailed, Epicurus offered a vision of life governed not by conquest or fame, but by the careful cultivation of pleasure and avoidance of pain. His philosophy arose as a counterpoint to Stoicism and other contemporary doctrines emphasizing virtue over well-being, positioning human happiness as both attainable and rational. Central to his thought is the idea that pleasure, properly understood, is the absence of pain and fear. He distinguished between natural and necessary desires, advocating moderation, mental cultivation, and self-reflection as the true sources of contentment. The soul, being mortal, should not be feared, and the universe, indifferent and composed of atoms, should be observed without superstition. Epicurus's calculus of pleasure is not indulgent but deliberate, emphasizing mental serenity above fleeting physical gratification. Tension emerges between his advocacy of individual serenity and the communal demands of society. How does one balance personal tranquility with obligations to family, friends, and civic life? This dialectic challenges readers to consider ethical responsibility alongside self-preservation. In the modern age, Epicurean thought resonates amid pervasive stress and consumerist temptation. Mindfulness, minimalism, and ethical hedonism echo his timeless counsel that measured pleasures, thoughtful friendships, and freedom from irrational fear cultivate a meaningful life. Ultimately, Epicurus teaches that wisdom and simplicity are the truest allies of happiness, and that serenity is neither luxury nor escape, but a disciplined art of living. Zeno of Citium. Born in Citium, a Greek city on Cyprus, Zeno lived during the tumultuous Hellenistic period around 334 to 262 BC, a time when traditional city-state identities were waning and personal ethics became central to human pursuit. He survived the storms of history not through conquest or wealth, but through contemplation, founding Stoicism, a philosophy that sought resilience in the face of an indifferent world. From the sunlit colonnades of Athens, Zeno taught that virtue alone suffices for happiness, that the mind, not circumstance, governs the soul's tranquility. He urged the cultivation of reason, discipline, and self-control as shields against the chaos of desire and fear. Life, he observed, is a dialogue between what we can command and what we cannot. To confuse the two is to court misery. Yet tension thrums at the heart of his thought. The insistence that external goods, wealth, fame, even health, are indifferent challenges human instinct. Can one truly remain unmoved when calamity strikes, when loved ones perish, or fortune deserts us? Stoicism, in its austere logic, asks us to accept what is, yet act rightly regardless, creating a paradox between human emotion and philosophical rigor. In modern life, Zeno's teachings echo in mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and resilience training. Amid social media, economic uncertainty, and global crisis, his counsel, focus on your actions, not the world's whims, offers practical serenity and ethical clarity. Ultimately, Zeno of Citium invites a life of examined action, not as a renunciation of joy, but as a disciplined embrace of reality, where freedom emerges not from possession, but from the mastery of one's own reasoned soul. Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes of Sinope, a figure of paradox and provocation, wandered the streets of Athens with little more than a lantern and a relentless questioning spirit. His life, stripped of luxury, embodied the pursuit of virtue unchained from societal expectation. He ate where he found sustenance, slept in a barrel, and mocked the pretensions of the powerful. In the vibrant chaos of classical Athens, Diogenes' actions pierced the veneer of civility. Philosophy, in his eyes, was not a theoretical pursuit confined to academies, but a lived practice that exposed the hollowness of social conventions. The agora became his classroom, ridicule his pedagogy. Wealth, status, and fame were distractions from the clarity of self-sufficiency and the cultivation of virtue. At the core, he urged humanity to seek authenticity above all. A life governed by necessity, simplicity, and honesty surpasses the artificial constructs that bind the mind. Happiness, Diogenes demonstrated, arises not from accumulation, but from liberation from desire itself. Yet tension arises in his extremes. His confrontational methods offended, bewildered, and even enraged contemporaries. Can the pursuit of virtue demand such unyielding rejection of norms? Or does society inevitably resist those who hold a mirror to its contradictions? Today, his legacy resonates in the minimalism movement, ethical critique, and in our challenge to consumerist impulses. In a world obsessed with image and acquisition, Diogenes whispers the enduring question, what do we truly need to live well? In the end, Diogenes teaches that freedom is not granted but chosen, and that a life examined, even to the point of discomfort, is the most courageous of all. Pyrrho. Pyrrho of Elis, a figure from the 4th century BCE, stands as one of the earliest proponents of philosophical skepticism, challenging the certainties of his time. Little is definitively known of his life, yet his influence echoes through centuries of thought, shaping the discourse on human knowledge and belief. Born in a world dominated by dogmatic schools, Pyrrho observed the endless disputes of philosophers and the fragility of human conviction. Traveling with Alexander the Great to distant lands, he encountered cultures whose customs contradicted Greek norms, deepening his sense that truth might be as varied as human perception itself. At the heart of Pyrrho's philosophy lies the suspension of judgment, epiky. He proposed that, since the senses are unreliable and reason cannot guarantee certainty, withholding assent to all claims leads to tranquility. Instead of clinging to supposed knowledge, one could live in a state of open-minded observation, free from the torment of doubt and contradiction. Yet this approach bears tension. If nothing can be known, can one act decisively? Pyrrho's vision challenges the human instinct for certainty, demanding courage to live without the comfort of assured beliefs while avoiding paralysis. In modern times, Pyrrhonian skepticism resonates in scientific inquiry, critical thinking, and mindfulness. Questioning assumptions, embracing uncertainty, and resisting dogma are tools for navigating complex realities and information-saturated lives. Ultimately, Pyrrho invites a radical humility, to accept that certainty is elusive, to observe without clinging, and to cultivate peace through the art of doubt. In a world obsessed with knowing, his lesson remains provocative, timeless, and quietly liberating. Plotinus. Born in 204 CE in Roman Egypt, Plotinus emerged as a towering figure in the landscape of late antique philosophy. A student of Ammonius Saccas, he developed a system that wove together metaphysics, ethics, and spirituality, seeking the nature of reality beyond the material world. His life was one of contemplation, travel, and teaching, yet he remained ever committed to the pursuit of inner unity and understanding. In an era rife with cultural and religious ferment, where Greek philosophy intersected with emerging Christian thought, Plotinus offered a vision of the soul's ascent, a path through intellect and virtue toward the One, the ultimate principle of existence. His writings, collected in the Enneads, reflected the intellectual rigor of Neoplatonism while addressing the human longing for transcendence. At the heart of Plotinus' philosophy lies the concept of emanation. All existence flows from the ineffable One, cascading through intellect and soul into the material realm. Human life, he argued, becomes meaningful when the soul recognizes its origin and strives to return, cultivating contemplation and virtue to rise above the illusions of sensory experience. Yet tension exists between the imperfection of the material world and the soul's aspiration for unity. This gap, between the finite and the infinite, creates both struggle and opportunity, compelling the seeker towards self-realization amidst the distractions of bodily existence. In today's world of distraction, consumerism, and fragmented attention, Plotinus' insistence on inner contemplation and ethical living resonates, inviting a reconsideration of what constitutes genuine fulfillment. His teachings encourage the pursuit of depth over superficiality, of the eternal over the ephemeral. Ultimately, Plotinus challenges us to recognize the invisible currents that shape reality, reminding us that true wisdom arises not from the world we see, but from the depths of the soul striving to return home. Proclus. Proclus, born in 412 CE in Constantinople, stands as one of the last great philosophers of the Neoplatonic tradition. Renowned for his systematic metaphysical works and commentaries on Plato, he represents the culmination of centuries of classical thought. His intellectual rigor was matched by a spiritual depth, blending reason and mysticism into a cohesive philosophical vision. Immersed in the rich philosophical and religious culture of late antiquity, Proclus studied under Syrianus in Athens, eventually leading the Platonic Academy. The era was marked by the tension between fading pagan traditions and the rise of Christian dominance. Within this crucible, Proclus sought to preserve the integrity of Platonic thought, framing it as both a metaphysical framework and a path to divine contemplation. At the heart of his philosophy lies the concept of a hierarchical cosmos, where the One radiates through successive levels of reality, culminating in the human soul's ascent toward unity with the divine. Every entity reflects this emanative structure, establishing a cosmos imbued with intelligibility, purpose, and spiritual significance. Yet Proclus's vision is not without tension. The intellectual pursuit of the One confronts the limitations of language, human reason, and the competing doctrines of emerging Christian theology. He wrestles with reconciling rigorous rationality with mystical experience, showing the struggle inherent in apprehending ultimate reality. In the modern world, Proclus's work resonates with those exploring the intersections of philosophy, metaphysics, and spirituality. His insistence on the coherence of a structured cosmos encourages reflection on meaning, ethics, and the human capacity for transcendence amidst complexity. Ultimately, Proclus exemplifies a philosophy that refuses to separate reason from the sacred, urging us to seek knowledge that elevates the mind and nurtures the soul. His legacy invites contemplation of existence as an ordered, luminous, and profoundly interconnected whole. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine of Hippo, born in 354 CE in present-day Algeria, stands as one of the towering figures of Christian thought. His life journey from a restless youth, entangled in worldly pleasures and philosophical curiosity, to a profound Christian theologian, embodies the quest for truth that transcends time. Raised in a milieu of Roman intellectualism, Augustine encountered both Manichaean dualism and Neoplatonic philosophy, shaping his reflective mind and propelling him toward a spiritual awakening. His core idea revolved around the restless human soul, and the necessity of divine grace. Augustine contended that human will alone is insufficient for true moral transformation. It is only through God's grace that one achieves genuine virtue and alignment with the eternal. This belief synthesized classical philosophical introspection with Christian doctrine, offering a vision of humanity that is simultaneously dignified and dependent. Yet tension marks his work. Augustine wrestled with the duality of human freedom and divine sovereignty, the dissonance between temporal desires and spiritual fulfillment, and the paradox of loving God while acknowledging human frailty. These conflicts imbue his writings with a tension that mirrors the struggle within every soul seeking purpose and virtue. In the modern era, Augustine's reflections on memory, time, and the interior life continue to resonate. His insights into ethical formation, societal justice, and the interplay between reason and faith illuminate contemporary debates on morality, identity, and human motivation. Ultimately, Augustine of Hippo exemplifies the enduring dialogue between human inquiry and spiritual transcendence, inviting each seeker to confront the depths of the self while aspiring to the infinite. Thomas Aquinas. Born in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas emerged as a towering figure in medieval philosophy, bridging faith and reason with an unparalleled intellectual rigor. His upbringing in the noble house of Aquino and early monastic influences set the stage for a life devoted to understanding the divine through human reason. Aquinas operated in a context where scholasticism sought to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, a delicate dance of logic and belief. Universities in Paris and Naples became the crucibles of his thought, as he debated, taught, and wrote with a precision that earned both admiration and controversy. At the core of his work lies the idea that reason and faith are not adversaries, but partners. Through arguments like the Five Ways, he sought to demonstrate the existence of God logically, while asserting that divine truths could be illuminated, though not fully comprehended, by human intellect. Ethics, politics, and metaphysics flowed naturally from this union, advocating a moral order rooted in natural law. Yet tension arises in his synthesis. Human reason is finite, divine knowledge infinite. Critics of his time feared that logic might dilute faith, while modern readers struggle with reconciling medieval assumptions with contemporary science. Aquinas wrestled with this duality, embracing the paradox as a necessary boundary of human understanding. In a modern world polarized between secular rationalism and spiritual tradition, Aquinas' insistence on dialogue between the two remains strikingly relevant. His methods encourage thoughtful engagement, not blind adherence, and underscore the enduring pursuit of wisdom. Ultimately, Thomas Aquinas teaches that seeking truth requires both courage and humility, a timeless reminder that reason and faith, together, illuminate the path of human inquiry. Anselm of Canterbury. Born in Aosta in 1033, Anselm rose to become Archbishop of Canterbury, leaving an indelible mark on medieval theology. He was both a devoted monk and a profound philosopher, whose intellectual rigor transformed the landscape of Christian thought. Living in a period of intense church-state interplay, Anselm navigated the complexities of Norman England, confronting kings over ecclesiastical autonomy while cultivating a monastic life steeped in contemplation. His environment demanded both political acuity and spiritual devotion, shaping a thinker who could reconcile worldly authority with divine law. Anselm's mind was preoccupied with understanding God through reason. His ontological argument, asserting that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived, sought to demonstrate the necessity of divine existence not through Scripture alone, but through rational insight. He believed faith and reason were not antagonists, but allies, each illuminating the other in the quest for truth. Yet this union of faith and intellect sparked tension. Critics questioned whether human reasoning could truly grasp the infinite, while secular powers bristled at his insistence on moral sovereignty. Anselm's own life mirrored this struggle, marked by exile and negotiation, reflecting the enduring friction between principle and pragmatism. In a modern context, Anselm's legacy resonates in the dialogue between science and spirituality, ethics and governance, and the enduring human pursuit of knowledge that transcends mere empirical observation. Ultimately, Anselm invites reflection on the balance of reason and devotion, urging an intellectual courage that neither diminishes wonder nor advocates inquiry. His life embodies the philosophical endeavor to bridge belief with understanding, leaving a template for contemplative minds across the ages. William of Ockham. William of Ockham, a 14th-century English philosopher and theologian, remains a towering figure in the history of logic and epistemology. Born around 1287, he lived during a period of intense scholastic debate, where reason and faith intertwined in complex ways, and universities were the crucibles of intellectual rigor. He emerged from the Franciscan order, immersed in theological disputes that often pitted simplicity against elaborate argumentation. The context of his work was a medieval Europe grappling with the synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy and Christian doctrine, a world where abstract principles had tangible social and ecclesiastical consequences. Occam's core idea, now immortalized as Occam's razor, champions the principle of parsimony. Entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity. In essence, explanations should remain as simple as possible, avoiding superfluous assumptions. This razor, though seemingly modest, carried profound implications for metaphysics, science, and theology, challenging the prevailing tendency toward unnecessary complexity. Yet, tension emerges in Occam's insistence on simplicity. Critics argue that the world's intricacies sometimes defy reduction, and that an overly minimalist approach risks neglecting depth and nuance. His philosophy thus oscillates between clarity and oversimplification, between disciplined reason and the allure of exhaustive speculation. In modern relevance, Occam's insight underpins scientific methodology, computational theory, and rational inquiry, reminding thinkers to prioritize elegance and efficiency in explanations, from physics to data science. Its enduring appeal lies in the balance it strikes between analytical rigor and practical application. Ultimately, William of Ockham challenges us to question the necessity of our assumptions, to strip ideas to their essence, and to recognize that simplicity is not mere economy, but a disciplined path toward understanding. Avicenna. Avicenna, born in 980 CE in Afshana near Bokhara, was a towering figure in the Islamic Golden Age, whose intellectual pursuits spanned medicine, philosophy, and metaphysics. By the age of 16, he had mastered the Quran, logic, mathematics, and natural sciences, and by 21, he was recognized as a physician of remarkable skill. His works, especially the Canon of Medicine, became foundational texts in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe, shaping centuries of medical understanding. He emerged in a context where the translation of Greek philosophical texts into Arabic catalyzed a synthesis of Hellenistic thought with Islamic theology. Avicenna sought to reconcile reason with faith, merging Aristotle's logic with Neoplatonic metaphysics to articulate a vision of the human soul and the cosmos. In a society valuing both spiritual devotion and empirical inquiry, his intellectual rigor was extraordinary. Central to Avicenna's philosophy is the notion that existence and essence are distinct, and that the intellect can ascend from the material to the divine through rational contemplation. The human soul, he argued, is immaterial, immortal, and capable of perceiving truths beyond sensory experience, a bridge between the temporal and the eternal. Yet this vision engenders tension. The pursuit of rational certainty sometimes conflicts with mystical or theological intuitions, revealing the limits of human reason and the perpetual negotiation between knowledge and belief. Today, Avicenna's insights resonate in fields ranging from medical ethics to philosophy of mind, influencing debates on consciousness, identity, and the interface of science and spirituality. His insistence on disciplined inquiry and intellectual courage continues to inspire thinkers navigating complex modern dilemmas. Ultimately, Avicenna reminds us that the pursuit of wisdom is an endeavor unbound by time, a dialogue between intellect and soul that stretches across centuries. Averroes. Averroes, born in Córdoba in 1126, was a towering figure of medieval philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. Revered for his prodigious intellect, he sought to reconcile reason with faith, translating and commenting extensively on Aristotle's works. His life unfolded amidst the rich cultural tapestry of Al-Andalus, where Islamic scholarship thrived yet faced doctrinal scrutiny. In a society where religious orthodoxy often dominated intellectual discourse, Averroes championed a philosophy that placed rational inquiry alongside spiritual devotion. He argued that the pursuit of truth through reason was not only compatible with religious life, but necessary for its deepest understanding. At the heart of his thought lies the conviction that philosophy and religion are not adversaries, but complementary paths to wisdom. By interpreting the sacred texts allegorically when necessary, he maintained that the ultimate truths of the universe can be apprehended both through revelation and through reasoned contemplation. Yet, his ideas generated tension. Traditionalists viewed his rationalist approach as a threat to religious authority, leading to censorship and exile. Averroes embodied the struggle between intellectual freedom and dogmatic constraint, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge can provoke resistance in any age. Today, Averroes' legacy endures as a bridge between civilizations, a testament to the enduring dialogue between faith and reason. His insistence on critical thought resonates in contemporary debates on science, ethics, and theology, inspiring scholars to navigate complexity without abandoning conviction. In reflecting on his life, we see a lesson. The courage to think critically, even under pressure, illuminates paths to understanding that endure far beyond the confines of one era or belief system. Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi, often hailed as the second teacher after Aristotle, traversed the vast landscapes of philosophy, logic, and political theory, leaving a legacy that bridged Greek thought with Islamic intellectual tradition. Born in the 10th century in Farab, his life unfolded during a period of remarkable cultural synthesis in the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars sought to reconcile reason and revelation. Immersed in the study of metaphysics, ethics, and music, Al-Farabi envisioned a universe governed by harmony and rational order, believing that the human soul could ascend to knowledge through disciplined reasoning. He proposed that societies flourish when led by virtuous philosophers, asserting that political organization and moral development were inseparable. His writings on the virtuous city echo Plato's Republic, yet they are imbued with the spiritual and ethical sensibilities of his own cultural context. Yet within his vision lies a tension. The ideal of a perfectly rational and virtuous society stands in stark contrast to the realities of human imperfection, ambition, and political disorder. The philosopher's dream confronts the pragmatic limitations of governance, highlighting the friction between aspiration and the human condition. Today, Al-Farabi's insistence on the fusion of ethics, logic, and governance resonates amid debates over leadership, education, and the pursuit of collective well-being. His work challenges modern thinkers to consider the moral foundations of society alongside technological and economic advancement, reminding us that intellect without virtue can falter. Ultimately, Al-Farabi's enduring insight is a call to elevate reason with wisdom, to align knowledge with ethical purpose, and to strive for a society where human potential can flourish not by chance, but through deliberate cultivation. Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali, a towering figure of Islamic philosophy and theology, was born in 1058 in Tus, Persia. Revered as the proof of Islam, his intellect traversed law, mysticism, and philosophy, leaving an indelible mark on both Eastern and Western thought. His life was a journey of rigorous scholarship and spiritual awakening, merging reason with profound devotion. In the context of the 11th century, the Islamic world was a crucible of philosophical exploration, with Greek, Persian, and Islamic thought converging. Al-Ghazali confronted the tensions between rational philosophy and religious orthodoxy, particularly in his critiques of the faltering certainty offered by philosophers of his time. His seminal work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, challenged prevailing assumptions, asserting that pure reason could not fully comprehend divine truth. At the core of Al-Ghazali's thought is the reconciliation of intellect with spiritual insight. Knowledge alone, he argued, is insufficient without ethical grounding and experiential understanding of God. Human reason reaches its limits where divine mysteries begin, urging humility in the pursuit of wisdom. This tension between reason and faith defines much of his legacy. The philosophical mind grappling with metaphysical realities, the scholar yearning for inner transformation. He exemplifies the perennial struggle of human understanding confronting the infinite. In Modern Relevance, Al-Ghazali speaks to contemporary seekers navigating ethical dilemmas, scientific inquiry, and spiritual longing. His insistence on integrating moral consciousness with intellectual rigor resonates across disciplines, urging thoughtful reflection in a fragmented world. Ultimately, Al-Ghazali teaches that the pursuit of truth is not a race of logic alone, but a journey of the heart and mind entwined, a timeless reminder that wisdom blooms where contemplation meets conscience. Maimonides. Maimonides, born Moses ben Maimon in 1138 in Córdoba, Spain, emerged as one of the most profound Jewish philosophers and legal scholars of the medieval world. His life traversed a landscape of cultural upheaval, fleeing from persecution in Andalusia to ultimately settle in Cairo, where he served as a physician and spiritual guide. The breadth of his writings reflects a mind attempting to reconcile law, reason, and faith within the tumultuous currents of his era. In an age when rationalism and revelation seemed at odds, Maimonides sought a synthesis. He authored the Mishneh Torah, codifying Jewish law with unparalleled clarity, and penned a guide for the perplexed, addressing philosophical quandaries of existence, the nature of God, and the reconciliation of Aristotelian philosophy with Torah wisdom. His core idea asserts that human reason and divine law are not enemies. Rather, the intellect is a vessel through which understanding of the divine can deepen. Yet this harmony is not without tension. Devout traditionalists question the use of philosophy in religious life, fearing erosion of faith, while rationalists challenge limits imposed by divine commandments. Maimonides himself inhabited the delicate balance between obedience and inquiry, advocating for a life guided by ethical understanding and intellectual pursuit. Today, his thought resonates across disciplines. Legal scholars, philosophers, and theologians alike encounter his insistence that ethical living demands both moral action and reasoned reflection. His works inspire dialogue between faith and science, law and philosophy, heritage and modernity. Maimonides leaves an enduring lesson. The pursuit of truth is both an obligation and a journey, and the human mind, disciplined by reason and morality, can glimpse the infinite even amidst earthly constraints. Confucius. Confucius, born in 551 BC in the state of Lu, China, was a philosopher whose life became a blueprint for moral and social order. Known as Confucius, he emerged in an era marked by political fragmentation and moral uncertainty, seeking to restore harmony through the cultivation of virtue and proper conduct. He observed that societies crumble not merely through external threats, but when individuals abandon ethical responsibility. Central to his teachings is the notion of Ren, the cultivation of humaneness, and Li, the adherence to ritual propriety. He advocated for the transformation of character as the foundation for societal stability, emphasizing education, self-reflection, and respect for hierarchy as means to achieve collective well-being. Yet, his philosophy faces inherent tension, the balance between rigid adherence to tradition and the dynamic needs of society. The ideal of moral perfection confronts the imperfect reality of human desires, raising questions about the extent to which ethical ideals can guide practical governance. His insistence on hierarchy also risks perpetuating inequity, illustrating the delicate interplay between moral aspiration and social structure. Today, Confucius' teachings resonate beyond the borders of China, influencing leadership, ethics, and education globally. In an age of technological acceleration and social flux, his emphasis on empathy, duty, and thoughtful reflection offers guidance for personal integrity and civic responsibility, reminding us that character shapes society as profoundly as laws or policies. Ultimately, Confucius leaves a timeless reminder: the pursuit of virtue is a journey, not a destination. In tending to one's character and relations, we cultivate a world where order, respect, and humaneness are not merely ideals, but lived experience. Mencius. Mencius, a seminal figure in Confucian philosophy, stands as a guardian of human morality, asserting that the essence of humanity is inherently good. He traversed the kingdoms of ancient China, counseling rulers with the conviction that virtuous governance nurtures the innate benevolence within every person. In the turbulent era of the warring states, when ambition often overshadowed righteousness, Mencius emerged as both teacher and moral compass. His dialogues with kings and commoners alike emphasized the delicate balance between authority and compassion, urging leaders to act in harmony with the natural moral inclinations of their people. The context of strife sharpened his vision, compelling him to illuminate a path where ethical integrity could coexist with political necessity. At the heart of his philosophy lies the belief that human nature is fundamentally good, endowed with the seeds of compassion, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom. These virtues, when cultivated, blossom into moral excellence, guiding actions that sustain societal harmony. Yet, this conviction faces tension. The harsh realities of greed, cruelty, and political expediency challenge the notion that goodness alone can shape the course of a kingdom. In the modern world, Mencius' teachings resonate as a reminder that leadership and education must foster empathy, ethical discernment, and the courage to act rightly, even amid systemic pressures. His insistence on nurturing inherent virtue speaks to contemporary debates on character development, social responsibility, and governance. Ultimately, Mencius invites reflection on the potential within each individual, that moral cultivation is not a mere philosophical exercise, but a transformative force, capable of elevating both self and society toward justice, harmony, and enduring human dignity. Laozi, an enigmatic figure of ancient China, is credited as the founder of Taoism and the author of the Tao Te Ching. His life is shrouded in legend. Some say he was a record-keeper in the Zhou dynasty who grew weary of political corruption and withdrew into the mountains, leaving behind a text that would outlive dynasties. He emerged during a time when society was governed by rigid hierarchies and moralistic codes. The chaos of court intrigue and social upheaval colored his vision, prompting a philosophy that sought harmony not through force, but through attunement with the natural flow of life. At the heart of Laozi's teaching lies the Tao, the ineffable way, which cannot be grasped fully yet pervades all things. He emphasized simplicity, humility, and non-action, wu-wei, not as passivity, but as a conscious alignment with the rhythms of existence, allowing life to unfold organically without unnecessary interference. Yet his ideas harbor tension. The ideal of effortless living clashes with the human impulse to control, achieve, and impose order. The paradox challenges readers to confront their own desires for dominance and certainty, questioning whether true wisdom is the mastery of the world or the mastery of oneself. In the modern era, Laozi resonates in movements that advocate mindfulness, sustainability, and a return to simplicity. His emphasis on flowing with change rather than resisting it offers guidance in an age dominated by speed, ambition, and digital saturation. Ultimately, Laozi whispers a subtle invitation. The greatest power may lie not in conquest, accumulation, or assertion, but in quiet observation, gentle yielding, and the courage to live in harmony with the impermanent, mysterious currents that shape our lives. Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi, an influential Taoist philosopher from the 4th century BCE, is renowned for his profound reflections on the nature of reality and the limits of human understanding. His writings, preserved in the texts bearing his name, weave parables, dialogues, and allegories that challenge conventional wisdom and invite readers into a realm of imaginative thought. One of the enduring facts about Zhuangzi is his embrace of spontaneity and freedom from rigid social norms, presenting a vision of life guided by natural harmony rather than imposed order. In the context of the Warring States period, Zhuangzi's philosophy arose amidst political turmoil and moral debates, offering an alternative to Confucian and legalist prescriptions. His work invites contemplation not as a manual for action, but as a mirror for the mind, encouraging detachment from external pressures and an alignment with the flux of existence. At the core of Zhuangzi's thought lies the principle that life and reality are inherently fluid, and human distinctions between life and death, success and failure, or self and other are provisional and often illusory. By questioning the certainty of knowledge, he fosters a playful engagement with the world, where liberation comes from recognizing the relativity of all things. This generates tension between human desires for control and the Taoist ideal of effortless flow, highlighting the paradox of seeking freedom while entangled in worldly concerns. Zhuangzi's narratives, such as the famous butterfly dream, encapsulate this delicate balance between perception and reality. In modern times, Zhuangzi resonates with those confronting stress, rigid systems, and the anxiety of constant achievement, offering guidance toward adaptability, creativity, and inner peace. His ideas challenge us to reconsider our assumptions and cultivate a lightness of being amidst complexity. Ultimately, Zhuangzi reminds us that wisdom is not mastery over the world, but harmony with its ceaseless transformations. Mozi. Mozi, an ancient Chinese thinker of the Warring States period, championed a philosophy that sharply contrasted with Confucian ritualism. He was born into a time of political chaos, where states waged near-constant wars, and social hierarchies dictated rigid moral expectations. In such a landscape, Mozi sought practical solutions for harmony and human welfare, advocating principles that were both ethical and utilitarian. He argued for universal love, urging people to extend care beyond family and kin to all individuals. Rejecting extravagance and empty rites, he emphasized merit over birth, utility over tradition, and action guided by the consequences of benefit or harm. His philosophy questioned the prevailing social norms, advocating a governance rooted in impartial concern and frugality. Yet, Mozi's ideas were not without tension. His rigorous utilitarianism clashed with deeply ingrained customs and the Confucian ideal of filial piety, making adoption of his principles socially and politically challenging. Leaders often resisted his counsel, and his insistence on equality and communal welfare was seen as radical, even threatening to establish power structures. Despite centuries separating his era from ours, Mozi resonates today. Concepts of impartial ethics, evidence-based governance, and social responsibility echo in contemporary debates on humanitarian intervention, global equity, and ethical policymaking. His insistence on practical morality offers a framework for navigating complex ethical dilemmas in modern society. Ultimately, Mosey teaches that philosophy must serve life, not merely adorn it. Reasoned compassion, guided by careful consideration of benefit and harm, remains a timeless tool for creating a more just and stable world. Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna, a towering philosopher of the 2nd century CE, redefined the landscape of Buddhist thought. Born in South India, he is celebrated as the founder of the Madhyamaka school, a revolutionary voice challenging the very notions of reality and permanence. His writings, particularly the Mula Madhyamakarika, probe the nature of existence, questioning the solidity of concepts we take for granted. In a time when philosophical traditions leaned heavily on metaphysical certainties, Nagarjuna emerged as a radical thinker. He engaged with prevailing doctrines not merely to refute them, but to reveal the subtle interplay of dependence and emptiness that underlies all phenomena. His approach was both dialectical and contemplative, inviting seekers to recognize that clinging to fixed ideas produces suffering, whereas insight into the fluidity of existence cultivates liberation. At the heart of his philosophy lies the concept of sunyata, or emptiness. This is not a nihilistic void, but the insight that all things arise dependent upon causes and conditions, lacking inherent, independent essence. Reality, therefore, is a web of interconnections, and wisdom emerges when we perceive this relational nature rather than imposing rigid labels. Yet this insight carries tension. To grasp emptiness without slipping into cynicism requires delicate discernment. Nagarjuna challenges the mind to hold paradox, to understand that phenomena are neither absolutely existent nor absolutely non-existent. In modern contexts, his thought resonates deeply with systems thinking, quantum physics, and ethical interdependence. Understanding interconnection encourages humility, compassion, and mindful action in an age dominated by fragmentation and certainty. Ultimately, Nagarjuna teaches that liberation is not abstract speculation, but practical awakening. By recognizing the emptiness of self and phenomena, one navigates life with clarity, balance, and profound ethical awareness. Shankara. Shankara, born in early 8th century India, emerged as a towering philosopher and theologian whose insights sculpted the contours of Advaita Vedanta. From a young age, his profound understanding of the Vedas distinguished him, compelling scholars and seekers alike to recognize his extraordinary intellect. In the turbulent tapestry of religious debate and philosophical inquiry of his era, Shankara traveled extensively, engaging with various schools of thought. He sought to reconcile the seeming dualities of life, appearance versus reality, self versus universe, by demonstrating the non-dual essence underlying all existence. His commentaries on the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, and Bhagavad Gita were not mere expositions, but bridges linking abstract metaphysics to lived spiritual practice. At the core of his philosophy lies the assertion that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is singular, eternal, and immutable, while the perceived multiplicity of the world is a transient illusion, Maya. Liberation, he taught, is attained not through ritual alone but through knowledge, discernment, and the awakening of inner awareness. Yet, this vision wrestles with tension, the undeniable reality of the phenomenal world and the practical demands of daily life challenge the absoluteness of non-dual realization. How can one honor worldly duties while recognizing their illusory nature? Shankara's approach offers a dialectic, guiding the aspirant to balance contemplation with engagement. Today, his teachings resonate in dialogues between science, consciousness studies, and comparative philosophy, reminding modern seekers of the profound unity underlying diversity. In a world fragmented by differences, Shankara's message urges an inward turn, seeking wisdom beyond appearances. Ultimately, Shankara illuminates a path where intellect, devotion, and introspection converge, inviting each individual to perceive the singular truth amidst the multiplicity of existence. Ramanuj, an 11th century philosopher and theologian, reshaped the spiritual landscape of India with his interpretation of Vedanta. Born in Tamil Nadu, his intellect and devotion led him to challenge prevailing notions of monistic philosophy, emphasizing a personal relationship with the divine rather than abstract metaphysics. In an era dominated by rigid scholasticism, Ramanuja's teachings emerged as a bridge between spiritual discipline and accessible devotion. His life reflected a synthesis of thought and practice, where rigorous scholarship met heartfelt bhakti, creating a path that welcomed all social strata. At the heart of his philosophy lies Vishishtadvaita, or qualified non-dualism, a vision where the individual soul and the supreme reality are inseparably connected, yet distinct. He argued that the divine is not an impersonal force, but a conscious entity with whom humans can interact, love, and seek grace. This perspective generated tension among contemporaries steeped in Advaita, provoking debates over the nature of reality, liberation, and the role of devotion. Ramanuja's insistence on equality, devotion, and surrender challenged entrenched hierarchies, unsettling traditional orthodoxies, while inspiring a movement of inclusive spirituality. Today, Ramanuja's insights resonate in discussions of ethics, social justice, and the pursuit of meaning. His emphasis on compassion, devotion, and interconnection offers guidance in a world increasingly fragmented by materialism and abstraction. Ultimately, Ramanuja's legacy endures as a reminder that philosophy is not merely intellectual pursuit but a lived experience. His life and thought beckon us to embrace knowledge with humility, devotion with discernment, and to recognize the sacred in both the cosmos and ourselves. Madhva, a towering figure in Indian philosophy, emerged in the 13th century as a profound thinker and the propounder of the Dvaita Vedanta. Born in Pajaka near Udupi, his early encounters with spiritual texts and rigorous discourse shaped a mind capable of challenging centuries of philosophical consensus. He stood at the crossroads of devotion and reason, asserting a dualistic worldview where God, individual souls, and the universe exist as distinct realities. Unlike Advaita, which dissolved the self into Brahman, Madhva celebrated individuality, advocating a clear, unwavering distinction between the creator and the created. His scholarship was not merely intellectual, but infused with a lived devotion to Vishnu, making philosophy a guide for moral and spiritual life. At the heart of Madhva's teaching lies a tension between certainty and humility. He offers unshakable clarity about the hierarchy of reality, yet insists on surrender and devotion, acknowledging the limits of human comprehension. The tension between reason and devotion becomes a path, urging seekers to embrace both inquiry and heartfelt practice. In contemporary life, Madhva's insistence on duality and moral accountability resonates in ethical debates and spiritual practices. His insistence on personal responsibility in the cosmic order finds echoes in discussions on environmental stewardship, social justice, and the cultivation of integrity in modern societies. Ultimately, Madhva reminds us that philosophy is not abstraction alone. It is a call to live with clarity, purpose, and devotion. In recognizing the distinctiveness of each soul and the supremacy of the divine, his thought invites reflection, discipline, and a humble embrace of a universe that is at once ordered and sacred. Chan Buddhism. Chan Buddhism emerged in China during the Tang Dynasty as a unique fusion of Indian Mahayana teachings and indigenous Chinese Taoist sensibilities. It emphasized direct experience of reality over textual study, privileging meditation as the path to awakening. Rooted in the legacy of Bodhidharma, Chan developed a contemplative practice that seeks to penetrate the nature of mind itself. Unlike scholastic traditions, it favors intuitive insight, often communicated through paradoxical anecdotes and koans, challenging conventional reasoning and language. Its practitioners aim to transcend dualities of self and other, subject and object, in pursuit of immediate realization. At its core, Chan asserts that enlightenment is not distant or abstract. It is present in every moment, accessible through mindfulness, meditation, and the cultivation of awareness. The mind, when uncluttered by attachment and conceptual thinking, reveals its luminous and unconditioned nature. Yet Chan carries inherent tension. The insistence on spontaneity and non-conceptual knowing stands in contrast to structured rituals and disciplined monastic life. The paradox of teaching what cannot be taught creates a space where tradition and innovation constantly negotiate, pushing the practitioner between guidance and self-reliance. In the modern world, Chan offers a profound antidote to distraction and fragmented attention. Its practices resonate with contemporary psychology, mindfulness movements, and contemplative therapies, providing tools for inner clarity amidst the noise of daily life. Ultimately, Chan Buddhism invites each individual to awaken to the present, to encounter reality directly, and to recognize the luminous essence inherent in all experience, suggesting that enlightenment is not a distant horizon, but the very ground beneath our feet. Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism emerged in China during the Tang dynasty as Chan, later spreading to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, emphasizing direct experience over doctrinal study. Its history intertwines with Mahayana teachings, yet it uniquely foregrounds meditation and mindfulness as paths to awakening, rather than textual scholarship alone. Rooted in a context of societal turbulence and philosophical exploration, Zen developed as a response to rigid scholasticism. Monks sought simplicity and clarity amidst the ornate rituals and elaborate sutras of conventional Buddhism. The aesthetic of minimalism, from rock gardens to ink paintings, mirrors this cultural and spiritual striving for essence. At its core, Zen posits that enlightenment is not a distant achievement but a present, lived reality. It is realized through zazen, or seated meditation, and the attentive observation of life's ordinary moments. Wisdom is cultivated in silence, in the pause between thought and perception, revealing the interconnection of all phenomena. Yet Zen harbors tension, the paradox of teaching the unteachable. Masters employ koans and seemingly nonsensical dialogues to jolt students beyond conceptual thinking, challenging the intellect while demanding surrender to experience. The path is both disciplined and paradoxical, inviting profound insight and, simultaneously, doubt and frustration. In modern life, Zen resonates with the search for presence in an age of distraction. Mindfulness practices derived from Zen meditation inform therapy, corporate culture, and personal well-being, offering tools to navigate stress and cultivate clarity, compassion, and simplicity. Ultimately, Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not an endpoint, but a way of being, an intimate engagement with the present. Its subtle philosophy encourages us to see reality without distortion, to live fully in the simplicity of now, and to discover the extraordinary within the ordinary. Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism, the teaching of the elders, stands as one of the oldest surviving schools of Buddhism, tracing its lineage to the earliest discourses of the Buddha preserved in the Pali Canon. Its enduring presence spans across Southeast Asia, from Sri Lanka to Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, serving as a living testament to centuries of contemplative practice and ethical discipline. At its heart, Theravada emphasizes individual liberation through rigorous adherence to the Eightfold Path, cultivating moral integrity, meditative concentration, and penetrating insight into the nature of reality. Liberation, or nibbana, is not abstract but a tangible cessation of suffering, achieved through mindfulness and the deep understanding of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. The monastic community, with its disciplined routines, acts as the custodian of these teachings, providing both structure and inspiration for lay followers. Yet, tension emerges between the austere monastic ideals and the pragmatic demands of everyday life. Modern societies, with their rapid pace, technological immersion, and material preoccupations, challenge the traditional rhythms of meditation and moral contemplation, raising questions about relevance, adaptation, and authenticity in practice. Despite these challenges, Theravada Buddhism persists as a source of clarity and grounding, offering contemplative tools that nurture ethical living, emotional resilience, and mental clarity. Its meditative insights illuminate pathways for understanding the mind, fostering compassion, and confronting the ephemeral nature of worldly attachments. In contemplating Theravada, one is invited to a disciplined exploration of existence itself, a quiet yet profound inquiry into suffering, liberation, and the cultivation of wisdom that resonates across time, inviting each practitioner to witness the impermanent dance of life with mindful awareness and deliberate care. Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka, founded by Nagarjuna in the 2nd century CE, presents a profound philosophical system that challenges ordinary perceptions of reality. It asserts that all phenomena lack intrinsic essence, emphasizing the concept of sunyata, or emptiness. This is not nihilism, but a recognition that things exist only in relation to causes, conditions, and conceptual imputation. Emerging within the context of early Indian Mahayana Buddhism, Madhyamaka arose as a methodical critique of both ontological absolutism and dogmatic attachment. Nagarjuna's texts, particularly the Mulamadhyamakarika, dissect the assumptions underpinning existence and knowledge, demonstrating the limitations of conventional reasoning. The school navigates between extremes, asserting neither absolute existence nor absolute non-existence, advocating a middle path in both thought and practice. At its core, Madhyamaka invites a radical reevaluation of how one engages with the world. Reality is fluid, dependent, and relational. Liberation arises from recognizing the emptiness of clinging, whether to self, objects, or ideas. This insight fosters compassion, detachment, and intellectual humility. Yet this insight carries tension. The intellectual rigor can be unsettling, seemingly dissolving certainty, while the practical aim remains ethical and liberative. How does one live meaningfully in a world perceived as devoid of inherent essence? Madhyamaka insists that understanding emptiness deepens engagement rather than diminishing it. In the modern era, Madhyamaka resonates with science, quantum physics, and cognitive psychology, offering tools to navigate conceptual rigidity and existential anxiety. Its teachings challenge entrenched beliefs and encourage adaptive thinking, mindful presence, and ethical responsiveness. Ultimately, Madhyamaka exemplifies the delicate art of balance, recognizing the emptiness of phenomena while fully participating in the web of life, thought, and compassion. Yogacara. Yogacara, often called the consciousness-only school, emerged in India during the 4th century CE, shaping Mahayana Buddhist thought with profound philosophical precision. It asserts that all experience is mediated through consciousness, suggesting that the external world, as we perceive it, is inseparable from the mind that perceives it. This radical insight challenged prevailing notions of reality and provided a systematic framework for understanding suffering and liberation. The intellectual context of Yogacara arose amid debates between realism and idealism, as Buddhist thinkers sought to reconcile the impermanence of phenomena with the continuity of karmic experience. The school was a response to both early Buddhist Abhidharma analysis and the metaphysical speculations of contemporaneous traditions, offering a model that was simultaneously psychological, ethical, and ontological. At its core, Yogacara proposes that the mind constructs reality through latent impressions called seeds, stored in the alaya vijnana, or storehouse consciousness. Human suffering is traced to misperceptions, and liberation becomes possible through disciplined cultivation of insight, ethical conduct, and meditative refinement. Yet tension arises in the school's subtle duality. Reality is both illusory and concrete, mind-dependent yet structured by karmic patterns. Critics argue that such a framework risks solipsism, while supporters maintain it provides a rigorous methodology for awakening. In the modern world, Yogacara resonates with cognitive science and psychology, where perception shapes experience and subjective reality is increasingly recognized as foundational. Its insights inform mindfulness, therapy, and contemplative practices, bridging ancient wisdom with contemporary understanding. Ultimately, Yogacara invites a contemplative inquiry, to see that the mind is not merely a passive observer but the architect of experience, and in refining it, one approaches freedom from suffering. Nyaya. Nyaya, the ancient Indian system of logic and reasoning, stands as a testament to humanity's pursuit of truth. Rooted in meticulous observation and structured debate, it provides the tools to distinguish between what is valid knowledge and what is mere assumption. Its methodology, emphasizing inference, perception, comparison, and verbal testimony, forms the backbone of critical thinking long before modern scientific frameworks emerged. In the philosophical and social context of classical India, Nyaya was not merely an academic exercise, but a practical guide for resolving disputes, assessing ethical dilemmas, and navigating the complexities of everyday life. Scholars engaged in rigorous dialogues, where clarity of thought and precision of argument determined intellectual authority and social credibility. The system elevated reasoning above conjecture, demanding careful attention to evidence and logical consistency. At its core, Nyaya celebrates the human capacity for discernment. It asserts that understanding the mechanisms of thought and argumentation is essential to achieving clarity in knowledge. It teaches that every assertion must withstand scrutiny, every conclusion must be rooted in sound premises, and every disagreement is an opportunity for refinement rather than conflict. Yet, tension arises between the ideal of absolute reason and the human tendency toward bias and error. Even the most meticulous logical structures encounter the unpredictable variables of perception, emotion, and context, revealing the fragile balance between certainty and doubt. In the modern era, Nyaya resonates with contemporary discourse on critical thinking, scientific reasoning, and ethical deliberation. Its principles underpin legal argumentation, academic inquiry, and even artificial intelligence, proving that the pursuit of knowledge transcends time. Ultimately, Nyaya invites reflection. Truth is not merely received but actively interrogated. The mind, disciplined yet open, becomes the instrument through which reality is understood, and through understanding, wisdom emerges. Samkhya. Samkhya, one of the oldest philosophical systems of India, presents a meticulous framework for understanding reality. It identifies the duality of existence, Purusha, the pure consciousness, and Prakriti, the material world. This distinction forms the foundation of human introspection and spiritual inquiry. Emerging during the early centuries of the Common Era, Samkhya was contextualized amidst a diverse tapestry of Indian philosophical thought, including yoga, Nyaya, and Vedanta. It provided a systematic approach to categorize elements of experience, blending metaphysics with practical insight into the workings of mind, body, and cosmos. At its core, Samkhya teaches that liberation is achieved through discernment, recognizing the self as distinct from the flux of matter and sensory experience. This awakening is not a dramatic revelation, but a gradual unfolding of insight, guiding one toward inner freedom and clarity. Yet, tension arises in its rigid dualism. Critics have argued that the strict separation of consciousness and matter may oversimplify the fluid interplay of life and experience. The challenge lies in reconciling this philosophical abstraction with the tangible, often chaotic realities of human existence. In the modern era, Samkhya resonates through mindfulness practices, cognitive science, and even quantum perspectives on consciousness. Its insistence on discernment encourages individuals to examine the roots of suffering, fostering self-awareness and ethical living. Ultimately, Samkhya invites a profound reflection that understanding the distinction between observer and observed can illuminate the path to freedom. It is both a map and a mirror, urging humanity to navigate the intricate layers of existence with clarity, patience, and discernment. Stoicism. Stoicism teaches that virtue is the highest good and that one should live in harmony with nature, guided by reason. It emerged in Athens around 300 BCE, founded by Zeno of Citium, and was practiced by figures such as Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. These thinkers emphasized resilience, self-discipline, and equanimity in the face of life's inevitable hardships. In a world governed by chance and external events beyond our control, Stoicism advocates mastering one's internal world. It proposes that while we cannot dictate circumstances, we can shape our responses. This philosophy positions reason as the compass for ethical living, and virtue as the measure of true freedom. The tension lies between external chaos and inner peace. Humans naturally desire comfort, recognition, and security, yet Stoicism demands detachment from these attachments, instructing that suffering arises not from the world itself but from our judgments about it. Reconciling ambition with acceptance, desire with moderation, constitutes the Stoic struggle. In the modern era, Stoicism resonates as a practical guide amidst uncertainty. From coping with societal pressures to navigating personal setbacks, its principles underpin contemporary practices in mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and resilience training. The call to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not offers clarity and emotional stability in an era saturated with information and expectation. Ultimately, Stoicism challenges us to cultivate inner fortitude and moral clarity. By focusing on character over circumstance, it illuminates a path where tranquility is found not in changing the world, but in mastering oneself, revealing a timeless philosophy that bridges the ancient and the present. Epicureanism. Epicureanism is a philosophy founded by Epicurus in the 4th century BCE, advocating the pursuit of pleasure through moderation, knowledge, and the cultivation of tranquility. Its followers viewed happiness not as indulgence in excess, but as the harmonious alignment of desires with reason. Epicurus' teachings challenge the common misconception that pleasure and virtue are mutually exclusive, asserting instead that simple, mindful pleasures foster the deepest contentment. In the context of ancient Greece, Epicureanism emerged amid political unrest and competing philosophical schools, offering a refuge from the anxieties of life. While Stoicism emphasized enduring hardship, Epicureanism emphasized intelligent avoidance of pain and the cultivation of a serene inner life. This approach resonated with those seeking stability and clarity in a tumultuous world, presenting a philosophy that values practical wisdom over abstract speculation. At its core, Epicureanism posits that the elimination of fear, especially fear of gods and death, is central to achieving peace of mind. Knowledge and friendship are pillars of this journey, guiding individuals to recognize which desires are natural and necessary, which are vain, and which are harmful. By discerning these distinctions, one can navigate life with measured joy, free from unnecessary suffering. Yet tension arises in balancing pleasure with ethical restraint. The pursuit of happiness demands vigilance, ensuring that immediate gratification does not undermine long-term tranquility. Modern readers often grapple with this delicate equilibrium amidst a culture that promotes excess and instant gratification. Today, Epicurean principles inform mindfulness practices, ethical consumption, and approaches to mental well-being, reminding us that thoughtful pleasure is both sustainable and enriching. Its enduring relevance lies in the quiet insistence that joy, wisely pursued, is the highest art of living. In embracing measured delight, one discovers a life both meaningful and serene. Cynicism. Cynicism emerged in ancient Greece as a philosophy challenging societal norms, advocating for a life guided by virtue rather than wealth, fame, or convention. Its earliest proponents, such as Diogenes of Sinope, rejected material excess and social pretense, living in deliberate simplicity to expose human folly. The context of cynicism is rooted in a world bustling with political ambition and social stratification, where the pursuit of power often overshadowed ethical integrity. Diogenes' radical lifestyle was both a mirror and a critique, holding up society's contradictions with stark clarity. He walked barefoot, carried minimal possessions, and openly mocked the pretensions of the elite, turning everyday interactions into moral examinations. At its core, cynicism is a relentless quest for authenticity. It questions motives, unearths hypocrisy, and champions self-sufficiency. It is less about pessimism and more about clarity, a demand for honesty in thought and action, unclouded by superficial desires. Yet tension arises in cynicism's extremity. Its uncompromising lens risks alienation, transforming critique into scorn and independence into isolation. The challenge lies in balancing truth-seeking with empathy, avoiding the descent from principled skepticism into corrosive negativity. In modern life, cynicism manifests in both critique and caution, political skepticism, social media disillusionment, and cultural satire all reflect a cynic's eye. Yet its principles encourage discernment, reminding us to interrogate norms and pursue authenticity amid performative excess. Ultimately, cynicism invites reflection, to question, to simplify, to live deliberately. It teaches that freedom and clarity often reside not in accumulation, but in the courage to confront reality as it is, and oneself as one truly is. Skepticism. Pyrrhonian skepticism, originating with Pyrrho of Elis, asserts that for every belief or assertion, an equally compelling counter-argument exists. Nothing can be known with certainty, and this suspension of judgment, epique, is the path to mental tranquility. In a world increasingly certain of its convictions, Pyrrhonian thought offers a radical alternative. Emerging in the tumult of Hellenistic Greece, when political and philosophical doctrines clashed, it challenged dogma, urging careful inquiry and avoidance of hasty conclusions. The skeptic's eye questions the reliability of perception, reasoning, and tradition alike, exposing the fragility of knowledge claims. At the core of Pyrrhonism lies an embrace of doubt, not as despair, but as liberation. By withholding assent, the mind frees itself from the distress that arises from conflict between opposing claims. Tranquility is found not in discovery of ultimate truths, but in the deliberate suspension of belief, in acknowledging that certainty is unattainable. Yet this approach generates tension. How does one navigate life, make decisions, or act morally if all truths are suspect? The skeptic answers pragmatically, adopt provisional norms, and act according to appearances, while maintaining internal detachment from dogmatic claims. Life proceeds, guided by reasoned habit rather than absolute certainty. Today, Pyrrhonian skepticism resonates amid information overload and ideological polarization. It encourages questioning assumptions, recognizing bias, and tolerating ambiguity without succumbing to cynicism. In an era of unrelenting assertion, it teaches that peace of mind arises not from knowledge, but from restraint in judgment. Ultimately, Pyrrhonian skepticism invites a paradoxical freedom, the serenity of one who knows they cannot know, yet still engages, thoughtfully and deliberately, with the unfolding world. Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism emerged in the 3rd century CE, a philosophical movement rooted in the teachings of Plato, but transformed through the mystical insights of Plotinus. It flourished within the cultural and spiritual ferment of the late Roman Empire, offering a bridge between rational inquiry and transcendental experience. Philosophers, mystics, and later Christian thinkers found in it a language to articulate the ineffable. At its heart, Neoplatonism posits a single source of all reality, the one from which emanates the nous, the realm of perfect forms, and finally the soul, which descends into the material world. Every being yearns to return to this ultimate source, and the purpose of life is an ascent of consciousness, through virtue, contemplation, and inner purification, toward unity with the divine. Yet this vision harbors tension. The immensity of the one renders the physical world seemingly insignificant, challenging human attachment to worldly life. Philosophers wrestle with the paradox of embracing reality while recognizing its impermanence and derivative nature. The tension between mystical union and ethical engagement creates a delicate balance, urging reflection rather than dogma. In contemporary thought, Neoplatonism resonates in disciplines that explore consciousness, metaphysics, and the pursuit of meaning. Its influence ripples through Renaissance art, modern psychology, and even virtual realms, where the quest for ideal forms mirrors the soul's ascent. Ultimately, Neoplatonism teaches that the journey toward understanding is both inward and upward. It invites a recognition that reality extends beyond perception, and that true knowledge is inseparable from the transformation of the self. By tracing the emanations of the One, we glimpse the possibility of harmonizing intellect, spirit, and life itself. Scholasticism. Scholasticism emerged as a dominant intellectual method in medieval Europe, a disciplined pursuit of knowledge where reason and faith intertwined. Monks, clerics, and scholars labored in abbeys and universities, meticulously dissecting texts, often the works of Aristotle, through rigorous debate and commentary. In an era where the mysteries of the divine governed both life and law, scholasticism sought to reconcile revelation with rational inquiry. It provided a structured framework for understanding theology, ethics, and natural philosophy, aiming to illuminate the coherence between the sacred and the sensible. The medieval university became a crucible where intellect met devotion. At its core, scholasticism championed systematic reasoning. It relied on disputation, dialectic, and careful textual exegesis, building layers of argumentation to clarify complex doctrines. Knowledge was not merely accumulated, it was synthesized, interrogated, and defended, reflecting a profound respect for logic as a lens through which truth could be discerned. Yet tension simmered between rigid orthodoxy and the freedom of philosophical exploration. Questions that probed too deeply risked heresy, and the reconciliation of ancient philosophy with Christian doctrine sometimes strained under contradictions. The method itself, though elegant, could become a labyrinth, where subtleties of argument overshadowed practical understanding. In the modern world, the echoes of scholasticism persist in disciplines demanding analytical rigor and ethical reflection. Legal reasoning, systematic theology, and even scientific methodology carry the imprint of its structured logic and commitment to clarity. Its insistence on critical dialogue foreshadows contemporary academic discourse. Ultimately, scholasticism embodies the enduring human endeavor to bridge faith and reason, demonstrating that the pursuit of truth is not linear, but a contemplative journey through questions, contradictions, and insight. Thomism. Thomism emerges from the intellectual legacy of Thomas Aquinas, a 13th-century Dominican philosopher whose synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy and Christian theology shaped centuries of Western thought. Rooted in scholastic rigor, Thomism strives to reconcile reason with faith, proposing that truths of the natural world and divine revelation are not in conflict but complementary. In its historical context, Thomism responded to the philosophical currents of medieval Europe, particularly the challenge of integrating classical philosophy into a Christian worldview. Aquinas argued that human reason, properly employed, could access the order of creation, illuminating ethical norms and metaphysical truths that ultimately reflect God's wisdom. At the core of Thomism lies the principle of analogy and the harmony of faith and reason. God's existence can be demonstrated through rational argumentation, while grace and revelation elevate understanding beyond the purely natural. Ethics and law are grounded in the natural order, giving humanity a moral compass aligned with universal purpose. Knowledge, morality, and spirituality intersect in a coherent, ordered system. Yet, tension persists between reason's limitations and the mysteries of faith. Thomism insists on rational justification, but acknowledges the ineffable dimensions of the divine. Human intellect can approach but never fully encompass ultimate truth, creating a dynamic interplay between inquiry and humility, certainty and wonder. In the modern era, Thomism offers a framework for dialogue between science, ethics, and religion, addressing contemporary debates on human rights, environmental stewardship, and the philosophical underpinnings of law. Its method fosters reflective inquiry grounded in enduring principles. Ultimately, Thomism invites a disciplined exploration of reality, urging the mind to pursue wisdom while embracing the transcendent. It is a testament to the enduring quest for understanding, bridging the temporal with the eternal. Rationalism. Rationalism asserts that reason is the primary source of knowledge, standing above sensory experience. Throughout history, thinkers like Descartes and Spinoza championed the mind's capacity to uncover universal truths without complete reliance on observation. Its factual claim is simple yet profound. The mind contains innate ideas that guide understanding of reality. In a world often swayed by appearances and fleeting impressions, rationalism provides a framework that privileges logic, coherence, and deductive certainty. Contextually, it emerged in the 17th century as a response to religious dogma and empirical uncertainty, offering a method to navigate the complexities of philosophy, science, and ethics through structured reasoning. At its core, rationalism rests on the conviction that thought itself can reveal fundamental truths, independent of external distractions. Knowledge, then, becomes an exercise in careful analysis, abstraction, and reflection. Yet tension exists between rationalism and empiricism. Where rationalists trust the intellect, empiricists insist on the senses as the ultimate arbitrator of truth. This friction has driven centuries of debate. Can one truly grasp the world through reason alone, or must experience temper the intellect's ambitions? In contemporary life, rationalist principles underpin mathematics, logic, computer science, and critical theory. They shape how we design algorithms, construct ethical frameworks, and evaluate claims in a landscape flooded with information. Reason becomes a compass amidst uncertainty, guiding inquiry beyond subjective bias. Ultimately, rationalism challenges us to trust the mind's capacity while remaining aware of its limits. It is both a map and a mirror, illuminating the contours of reality and reflecting the disciplined potential of human thought. Empiricism. Knowledge begins at the edge of experience, where the senses confront the world with unfiltered immediacy. It is a realm where observation is king, and certainty is sought not in abstract reasoning alone, but in the evidence that our eyes, ears, and touch relay to the mind. From the ripples on a pond to the patterns of the stars, empiricism insists that truth must be traced in the tangible. In the centuries of philosophical inquiry, empiricism arose as a counterpoint to rationalist traditions, challenging the idea that innate concepts or pure reason alone could yield understanding. Thinkers like John Locke painted the human mind as a blank canvas, shaped and colored solely by sensory input, while David Hume pressed further, questioning causation itself as a habit of observation rather than an inherent necessity. At its core, empiricism is the philosophy of evidence. Knowledge is a product of experience, filtered through careful scrutiny and reflective interpretation. It celebrates the meticulous gathering of data, the patient watching, and the disciplined testing of ideas against the world itself. Yet tension persists. How do we trust senses that deceive? How do we bridge observation to universal principles without slipping into skepticism? Empiricism must constantly negotiate between the limits of perception and the thirst for understanding. In a modern landscape of data, science, and technology, empiricism resonates more than ever. Experiments, statistics, and tangible evidence form the backbone of innovation, from medicine to artificial intelligence. Ultimately, empiricism reminds us that knowledge is not a lofty ideal detached from life, but a living conversation with the world. The mind, attentive and humble, is invited to witness, question, and learn, ever responsive to the subtle lessons that reality, in all its immediacy, has to offer. Baruch Spinoza. Born in 1632 in Amsterdam, Spinoza emerged as a radical thinker whose ideas challenged the religious and philosophical norms of his time. He was excommunicated from the Jewish community for his unorthodox views, yet he pursued a life of rigorous intellectual inquiry, living modestly while refining his philosophy. Spinoza's work unfolded during the Dutch Golden Age, a period of remarkable scientific, cultural, and economic flourishing. The intellectual atmosphere encouraged debate and exploration, yet strict religious orthodoxy constrained public expression. Amid this backdrop, Spinoza developed a systematic vision of reality grounded in reason and the unity of nature. At the heart of Spinoza's philosophy is the conception of God and nature as one substance, a single, infinite reality expressed through infinite attributes. Human beings are modes within this substance, their freedom rooted not in arbitrary choice, but in understanding the necessity of natural laws and aligning one's mind with reason. This vision creates tension between conventional religious authority, which emphasizes obedience and transcendence, and Spinoza's insistence on rational comprehension and moral autonomy. The confrontation with dogma and the pursuit of intellectual integrity placed him in direct opposition to societal norms. Today, Spinoza's ideas resonate in discussions of secular ethics, environmental philosophy, and cognitive science. His insistence that understanding the world leads to peace of mind prefigures modern notions of well-being grounded in knowledge rather than superstition. Ultimately, Spinoza invites us to reconsider freedom, divinity, and the self not as external dictates, but as intrinsic harmonies of reality. His legacy endures as a testament to the courage of reasoned thought and the enduring quest for human flourishing. René Descartes. René Descartes, the 17th century French philosopher and mathematician, transformed the landscape of Western thought with his radical insistence on reason as the foundation of knowledge. Born in 1596, he navigated a world still steeped in scholastic tradition, where faith and inherited authority often eclipsed individual inquiry. In the shadow of religious dogma and scientific uncertainty, Descartes sought a method to attain certainty. He questioned everything, famously stripping away assumptions until he arrived at a single, indubitable truth. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. From this anchor of self-awareness, he endeavored to reconstruct knowledge with clarity and precision, applying rigorous logic to both philosophy and the nascent field of mathematics, laying the groundwork for analytic geometry. This pursuit, however, was not without tension. The Cartesian insistence on reason as the ultimate arbiter clashed with the spiritual and empirical authorities of his age. It invited skepticism and debate, forcing society to reconcile human consciousness with the mysteries of existence and raising perennial questions about the limits of certainty and the interplay of mind and body. Today, Descartes' legacy permeates science, philosophy, and technology. His methodological skepticism underpins modern scientific inquiry, while his reflections on consciousness echo in debates about artificial intelligence and cognitive science. The Cartesian duality continues to shape discussions on mind, matter, and identity. Ultimately, Descartes challenges us to confront the foundations of our own thinking. In a world awash with information, his philosophy is a call to deliberate, to doubt with purpose, and to recognize that the act of thinking itself is the first step toward understanding reality. John Locke. John Locke, born in 1632 in Rington, England, emerged as a seminal thinker of the Enlightenment, shaping the foundations of liberal democracy and human understanding. His life unfolded during a period marked by political upheaval, civil war, and the shifting power of monarchy, events that seared into his philosophy a profound concern for liberty and governance. Locke's core idea rests upon the concept of the mind as a tabula rasa, a blank slate upon which experience writes knowledge. Human beings, he argued, are born without innate ideas. Understanding grows from observation and reflection. This principle extended naturally into his political philosophy. Governments exist by the consent of the governed, and individuals possess inherent rights to life, liberty, and property. Yet within his framework lies tension. Locke espoused freedom and equality, yet accepted the institution of slavery in certain contexts and restricted political participation to propertied men. His ideas, revolutionary in their advocacy of rights, simultaneously mirrored the contradictions of the society he inhabited. In modern relevance, Locke's influence resonates in constitutional democracies, human rights discourse, and educational theory. The principles of consent, individual liberty, and empirical inquiry continue to underpin debates over governance, civil liberties, and moral responsibility. Locke challenges us to confront the delicate balance between freedom and structure, theory and practice. His insistence on reasoned judgment and the moral foundation of authority reminds us that knowledge and governance are not mere inheritances. They are cultivated responsibilities, demanding both reflection and vigilance. George Berkeley. George Berkeley, an 18th-century Irish philosopher and Anglican bishop, was a central figure in the development of idealism, challenging the prevailing notions of material substance. Born in 1685 in Kilkenny, Ireland, Berkeley pursued philosophy and theology, ultimately shaping a radical vision that would reverberate through metaphysics and epistemology. Berkeley's ideas emerged in a period dominated by Locke's empiricism, where matter was assumed to exist independently of perception. The scientific revolution and the mechanistic worldview created a context in which philosophers debated the nature of reality, causality, and perception, setting the stage for Berkeley's audacious propositions. At the heart of Berkeley's thought lies the principle of immaterialism, often summarized as "esse percipi," to be is to be perceived. He argued that objects exist only insofar as they are experienced by a mind. Reality is fundamentally composed of ideas sustained by God's perception. This core idea rejected materialism, insisting that the external world cannot exist independently of consciousness. This position generated tension, provoking criticism from materialist and empiricist contemporaries. Skeptics questioned how consistent experience and shared reality could exist if objects depended entirely on perception, and whether Berkeley's God-centered framework adequately addressed the apparent autonomy of the natural world. Berkeley's philosophy resonates today in discussions of virtual reality, consciousness, and the limits of perception. His insights anticipate debates in cognitive science, simulation theory, and the philosophy of mind, compelling a reconsideration of what we take for granted as real. Ultimately, Berkeley challenges us to confront the intimate connection between perception and existence, suggesting that reality is less about matter than the minds that apprehend it, and urging reflection on the profound role of consciousness in shaping the world we inhabit. David Hume. David Hume was an 18th-century Scottish philosopher whose work reshaped the landscape of modern thought. Born in Edinburgh in 1711, he emerged during the Enlightenment, a time when reason, observation, and empirical inquiry challenged tradition and superstition. His writings, most notably A Treatise of Human Nature, sought to understand human behavior not through divine edict, but through the patterns of experience and sentiment. In a world dominated by rigid metaphysics and theological certainty, Hume asked radical questions. What do we truly know? How do beliefs form? He observed that reason alone cannot motivate action. Rather, human conduct springs from passions, habits, and associations. Knowledge, he argued, is never absolute but probabilistic, built on repeated experience and custom, rather than immutable principles. At the heart of Hume's philosophy lies a tension between skepticism and practicality. He questioned the certainty of causation, the self, and religious dogma, yet he did not descend into paralysis. Instead, he recognized that human life thrives on belief and routine, even as reason tempers our certainties. This duality, between doubt and necessity, defines the enduring challenge of understanding ourselves. Today, Hume's insights resonate in cognitive science, psychology, and ethics, influencing debates on morality without metaphysics, the limits of prediction, and the human tendency toward bias. His empiricism underscores the fragility of certainty in a data-driven world. In contemplating Hume, we confront a timeless lesson: to embrace curiosity while acknowledging the limits of knowledge, to question boldly yet live practically. In uncertainty lies both humility and liberation, for understanding the mind is not about conquering truth, but navigating its endless depths. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, an 18th-century German philosopher, reshaped the landscape of modern thought, insisting that reason structures human experience. Born in Königsberg, he lived a disciplined life, dedicating himself to inquiry into the limits and capacities of human understanding, ethics, and metaphysics. At a time when empiricism and rationalism battled for philosophical dominance, Kant sought a synthesis, asking not just what we know, but how we know. He questioned the very conditions under which knowledge and moral judgments are possible, setting the stage for critical philosophy. Kant's core idea rests on the principle that the mind is not a passive mirror of the world, but actively shapes our experience. Through the categories of understanding and the forms of intuition, humans impose order on phenomena, while moral law is grounded in reason itself, independent of desires, expressed in the categorical imperative: act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Tension arises between freedom and determinism, between the noumenal world, which remains unknowable, and the phenomenal world, which we experience. This duality challenges humans to reconcile moral autonomy with the constraints of reality, pushing the boundaries of responsibility and ethical reflection. In the modern era, Kant's insights underpin debates in ethics, law, and human rights, influencing everything from artificial intelligence to global justice, reminding us that reason and morality are inseparable from the framework of human action. Ultimately, Kant compels a reflection on the limits and duties of human reason, asking not merely how we think or act, but how we ought to live in a world shaped by both knowledge and conscience. W F Hegel. Born in 1770 in Stuttgart, Germany, Hegel emerged as a towering figure in the landscape of German idealism. His life spanned an era of revolutionary upheaval and philosophical ferment, from the French Revolution to the Napoleonic Wars, providing fertile ground for his rigorous explorations of reason, history, and spirit. Hegel sought to understand reality not as a static collection of objects, but as a dynamic, unfolding process. His context was one of philosophical reaction to both Kantian limits and Enlightenment rationalism, striving to reconcile individual freedom with the inexorable flow of historical necessity. Philosophy, for Hegel, was the labor of interpreting this evolving rational structure. At the heart of his thought lies the dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, a relentless movement where contradictions are not mere obstacles, but the engines of progress. Spirit, or Geist, evolves through conflict, achieving self-consciousness and freedom over time, weaving together human experience, culture, and history into a coherent narrative. Yet, within this dialectical vision resides tension. The very notion that freedom emerges through structured historical processes raises questions. Does human agency bow too easily to deterministic currents? Can the march of history truly resolve moral and social contradictions? Or does it risk justifying injustice in the guise of progress? In the modern world, Hegel's ideas resonate in political theory, cultural studies, and systems thinking, offering frameworks to navigate ideological conflicts, social transformations, and the ethical dilemmas of collective life. The dialectical method endures as a lens for understanding the interplay of ideas, institutions, and human aspiration. Ultimately, Hegel challenges us to see life as a living logic, a vast, intricate unfolding where reason, freedom, and history converge, urging a mindful engagement with the world's ceaseless becoming. Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th-century German philosopher, is widely recognized for his profound exploration of human desire and suffering. Born in 1788, his work laid the groundwork for existential and pessimistic thought, influencing thinkers, artists, and writers for generations. Schopenhauer's philosophical journey unfolded against the backdrop of post-Kantian Germany, a period marked by the tension between Enlightenment rationalism and Romantic introspection. Amid social upheaval and intellectual ferment, he sought to understand the fundamental forces driving human behavior. At the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy is the concept of the will, an irrational, ceaseless striving that underpins all existence. Human life, he argued, is dominated by endless desires, and fulfillment is fleeting. Happiness is momentary, suffering inevitable. Only through art, compassion, and the negation of the will can one attain a measure of relief from life's inherent dissatisfaction. This view generates tension, as it confronts optimism and progress with stark realism. While society often celebrates ambition and achievement, Schopenhauer insists that these are merely manifestations of the same restless will that guarantees disappointment. This philosophical friction challenges readers to confront uncomfortable truths about the limits of personal control and the pervasive nature of suffering. In modern times, Schopenhauer's insights resonate in psychology, literature, and even behavioral economics. The recognition of cognitive biases, the transient nature of pleasure, and the struggles of mental health echo his reflections on desire and frustration. Ultimately, Schopenhauer encourages a contemplative life. By acknowledging the inescapable currents of desire and suffering, we cultivate awareness, empathy, and a quiet resilience, an invitation to navigate existence with sober mindfulness and philosophical courage. Søren Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard, born in 1813 in Copenhagen, was a Danish philosopher whose writings laid the groundwork for existential thought. He navigated the corridors of theology, psychology, and philosophy, producing works that challenged the complacencies of 19th-century Christian life. Raised in a household shadowed by his father's melancholy and rigid piety, Kierkegaard developed an acute awareness of personal responsibility and the weight of ethical choice. His upbringing, intertwined with grief and introspection, shaped his lifelong obsession with individuality, faith, and the nature of existence. At the heart of his philosophy lies the concept of the leap of faith. He argued that rationality alone cannot bridge the chasm between the finite and the infinite. True understanding requires personal commitment and existential courage. Life is lived subjectively, and meaning emerges not from societal norms, but from the authentic choices of the individual. Kierkegaard's thought wrestled with tension between reason and faith, despair and hope, aesthetic allure and ethical rigor. He depicted human existence as a series of stages, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, each fraught with challenges that demand self-examination and decisive engagement. Today, Kierkegaard's insights resonate in a world of digital distraction, moral ambiguity, and pervasive anxiety. His insistence on personal authenticity and inward reflection invites a confrontation with one's own convictions amidst external pressures, offering a path to resilient and self-aware living. In the quiet contemplation of his work, one is reminded that life's deepest truths are not inherited but discovered. To live fully is to embrace uncertainty, act with conscience, and continually strive toward the singular truth of one's own existence. Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche emerged in the 19th century as a revolutionary philosopher whose writings challenged the moral, religious, and cultural foundations of Europe. Born in 1844 in Prussia, he displayed prodigious intellect early, ultimately shaping thought in ways that rippled through existentialism, psychology, and art. Nietzsche lived in an era shadowed by industrialization, rigid morality, and the waning influence of Christianity. He observed a society constrained by dogma, where individual potential was often suppressed under collective norms. This context fueled his critique of conventional values and the structures that perpetuated mediocrity and conformity. At the core of Nietzsche's philosophy lies the affirmation of life and the embrace of human creativity. He urged humanity to transcend imposed moralities, invent new values, and become what he called the Übermensch, a self-determined individual who shapes meaning from existence rather than deferring to external dictates. Yet his thought carries inherent tension. The call for self-overcoming confronts the deep-seated fear of isolation and moral ambiguity. Rejecting traditional frameworks can empower, but also destabilize, leaving one adrift in uncertainty. Nietzsche's work oscillates between liberation and the vertigo of radical freedom, questioning whether humanity can bear the weight of creating its own meaning. In the modern age, his insights resonate profoundly. From existentialist literature to contemporary debates on morality, individuality, and authenticity, Nietzsche challenges us to examine the structures we accept unquestioningly and to cultivate a life defined by intentionality rather than passive inheritance. Ultimately, Nietzsche compels reflection, to confront life fully, embracing its chaos and beauty, and to forge a path guided not by prescribed doctrines, but by the courage to become the architects of our own existence. Karl Marx. Born in 1818 in Trier, Germany, Karl Marx emerged as one of the most influential thinkers of the 19th century. He was a philosopher, economist, and revolutionary whose writings dissected the forces shaping society, economy, and class. His early life, marked by exposure to philosophy, history, and political thought, laid the groundwork for his analytical rigor and uncompromising critique of inequality. Marx wrote in a world dominated by industrialization, where factory walls echoed with the toil of the working class, and wealth accumulated in the hands of a few. He observed not abstract theories, but lived realities, the alienation of labor, the stark contrast between bourgeois comfort and proletarian struggle, and the relentless churn of capitalist markets. His environment was one where ideas collided with power, and theory demanded praxis. At the heart of Marx's thought was the conviction that material conditions shape human consciousness. He argued that history is the story of class struggle, where exploitation is embedded in the very structures of society. Capital, he insisted, was not merely wealth, but a mechanism of domination, perpetuating cycles of oppression while promising freedom. Yet tension arises in his vision. The hope for a classless society conflicts with the unpredictability of human agency and the inertia of entrenched power. The promise of revolution contends with the risks of authoritarianism when ideology becomes dogma. Today, Marx's critiques resonate in debates over inequality, labor rights, and the ethics of wealth accumulation. From global supply chains to gig economies, his analysis of exploitation continues to illuminate contemporary struggles. Ultimately, Marx invites reflection on the structures we inhabit, to question who benefits, who suffers, and whether human society can envision justice beyond mere survival and profit. John Stuart Mill. Born in 1806 in London, John Stuart Mill emerged as one of the most influential philosophers and economists of the 19th century, shaped profoundly by the rigorous education imposed by his father, James Mill. His intellectual upbringing in classical literature, logic, and political economy forged a mind capable of dissecting human liberty and societal structures with unmatched precision. Mill's early exposure to utilitarian thought, particularly that of Jeremy Bentham, provided the ethical foundation upon which he would construct his seminal works. In the backdrop of Industrial Revolution England, where individual freedoms were frequently subordinated to social conformity and state authority, Mill's writings became both a critique and a blueprint. The rapid urbanization, mechanized labor, and rising political consciousness demanded an ethical and philosophical framework to negotiate personal autonomy and collective welfare. Central to Mill's philosophy is the principle of liberty, the inviolable right of individuals to pursue their own happiness so long as they do not harm others. His advocacy for freedom of thought, expression, and conscience articulates a vision of society where dissent, debate, and diversity are not only tolerated but cherished as essential to human progress. Yet, he wrestled with the tension between individual liberty and social responsibility, recognizing that absolute freedom could falter under the weight of societal pressures or utilitarian calculation. Today, Mill's insights resonate in debates on free speech, digital privacy, and governmental overreach, challenging modern societies to balance liberty with collective welfare. His reflections offer a lens through which the ethical dilemmas of contemporary governance and culture can be examined. Ultimately, Mill endures as a thinker who invites humanity to cherish freedom, embrace reasoned dialogue, and navigate the delicate interplay between self-determination and moral obligation. Jeremy Bentham. Born in 1748 in London, Jeremy Bentham emerged as a formidable voice in moral and legal philosophy, challenging the rigid traditions of his era. A prodigy, he studied law at an age when most children were learning arithmetic, yet his intellect transcended the courtroom, seeking principles that could guide society as a whole. Bentham's life unfolded against the backdrop of Enlightenment thought, a period teeming with ideas of reason, progress, and human perfectibility. Monarchies and archaic legal codes dominated Europe, yet thinkers like Bentham dared to envision a world governed by rationality rather than privilege, where happiness could be measured and maximized. At the heart of his philosophy lies utilitarianism, the doctrine that the moral worth of actions is determined by their contribution to overall happiness. He argued that laws, governance, and social institutions should be evaluated by their capacity to promote the greatest good for the greatest number. This radical calculus promised an ethical architecture devoid of superstition or inherited authority. Yet tension shadowed his theory. Can human pleasure and pain truly be quantified? Does the pursuit of collective happiness risk suppressing individual liberty or minority rights? Bentham grappled with these dilemmas, acknowledging that abstraction must meet the messiness of human life. Today, Bentham's influence endures in public policy, economics, and ethics, from welfare economics to cost-benefit analysis. Modern debates over rights, surveillance, and social justice echo his insistence on rational evaluation of consequences, even as the complexities of modern societies test utilitarian calculus. Bentham invites reflection. Reason can illuminate paths to collective well-being, yet morality demands humility, awareness of nuance, and the courage to confront the unpredictable consequences of human action. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Born in Geneva in 1712, Rousseau emerged as one of the most provocative voices of the Enlightenment, challenging conventions of politics, society, and human nature. He wandered through Europe, observing life, reading widely, and composing essays that questioned the very foundations of civilization. His presence in salons and correspondence with prominent thinkers amplified a radical vision that would unsettle monarchies and intellectual circles alike. In a Europe governed by rigid hierarchies and a growing sense of rational mastery over nature, Rousseau's reflections offered a mirror to a world straining under artificial constraints. He examined inequality not as a mere social artifact but as a corruption of innate human goodness, arguing that society's structures often distort natural morality and freedom. At the heart of his thought lies the conviction that humans are born free, yet are everywhere in chains, shackled not by brute force, but by the subtle coercions of culture, property, and law. The ideal emerges not in isolation, but in a carefully nurtured social contract, where collective agreement preserves liberty while cultivating virtue. Yet this vision carries tension. How can one reconcile the liberty of the individual with the necessity of social cohesion? Rousseau's optimism about natural human virtue clashes with the relentless demands of organized society, creating a philosophical friction that resonates through debates on democracy, education, and moral philosophy. Today, Rousseau's ideas echo in conversations about civic engagement, educational reform, and ecological awareness, reminding us that freedom, responsibility, and authenticity remain in perpetual negotiation. Ultimately, Rousseau invites a reflective pause. The question is not merely how we live, but whether we live in harmony with both our inner nature and the collective world we shape. Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th-century English philosopher, emerged amidst the turbulence of civil war and political upheaval. His life spanned an era where monarchy, rebellion, and religious discord collided, leaving a profound imprint on his vision of society. Observing humanity in its rawest state, he questioned the very nature of order and chaos. Hobbes contended that human beings, if left unchecked, are driven by self-interest, fear, and desire, inevitably leading to conflict. Life in its natural condition, he argued, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It is within this bleak landscape of human instinct that the need for structure and governance becomes undeniable. At the heart of his philosophy lies the social contract. Individuals relinquish certain freedoms to a sovereign authority in exchange for security and collective stability. This core idea reshapes the chaos of nature into a disciplined society where power, though absolute, ensures the protection of life. Yet tension arises between liberty and authority. The surrender of freedom to a sovereign raises questions about the legitimacy of power, the limits of obedience, and the potential for tyranny. Hobbes' vision balances precariously between salvation through order and the peril of oppression. Today, Hobbes resonates in debates on governance, law enforcement, and the ethical obligations of the state. In an age of political polarization and global crisis, his insistence on structured authority as a safeguard against disorder maintains its haunting relevance. Ultimately, Hobbes compels reflection on the human condition, whether peace is a gift of moral virtue or the careful orchestration of authority. His philosophy reminds us that beneath civilization's surface, the pulse of human nature demands both vigilance and wisdom. Edmund Husserl. Edmund Husserl, a seminal figure in modern philosophy, charted an intellectual course that sought to reclaim the foundational structures of human consciousness. Born in 1859 in Prossnitz, Moravia, Husserl's academic journey traversed mathematics and philosophy, shaping a rigor of thought that demanded precision in examining the mind's engagement with the world. In an era dominated by positivism and empirical sciences, Husserl confronted the assumption that external observation alone could yield ultimate truth. He argued that such methods overlooked the richness of subjective experience, the very ground upon which knowledge rests. Philosophy, for him, was not merely interpretive but foundational, a discipline to uncover the essence of phenomena before any scientific abstraction. Central to Husserl's vision was the idea of phenomenology, a disciplined reflection upon consciousness that suspends presuppositions about reality, seeking the essence of experiences themselves. He urged a careful bracketing of the natural world, allowing the mind to illuminate the structures of perception, intentionality, and meaning-making. Yet this rigorous introspection introduced tension. Can a method rooted in pure subjectivity yield universal insight? Critics challenged phenomenology's accessibility and applicability, questioning whether the mind's solitary observations could genuinely anchor objective understanding. Despite these challenges, Husserl's influence resonates today. Cognitive science, psychology, and even artificial intelligence grapple with the contours of consciousness and experience, echoing his insistence on examining thought before action. His work bridges the empirical and the reflective, prompting enduring questions about how we know, perceive, and live. Ultimately, Husserl reminds us that philosophy is an active lens, shaping not only the understanding of the world, but the very framework through which we inhabit it. Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger, born in 1889 in Meßkirch, Germany, was a towering figure in 20th-century philosophy, often considered the father of existential phenomenology. He studied under Edmund Husserl, whose focus on consciousness profoundly influenced Heidegger, yet he diverged by turning attention from abstract consciousness to the question of being itself. Heidegger's work emerged in a post-World War I context, when Europe grappled with disillusionment, cultural crisis, and the fragility of human understanding. Philosophy sought to navigate between the certainties of science and the uncertainty of lived experience, a tension Heidegger explored with meticulous rigor. At the core of his philosophy lies the inquiry into being. In Being and Time, he introduces Dasein, the human being as a being aware of its existence, whose essence is not a fixed identity, but a continuous unfolding in relation to time, mortality, and authenticity. Heidegger asserts that understanding one's own temporality and finitude enables genuine engagement with life, rather than a superficial drift through societal conventions. This perspective contains tension. The pursuit of authenticity collides with social norms, technological domination, and the allure of conformity. Heidegger warned that humanity risks losing itself in the they, becoming estranged from the deeper dimensions of existence. In Modern Relevance, his critique of technology, particularly in the question concerning technology, resonates as digitalization and algorithmic mediation increasingly shape human perception, decision-making, and experience of the world. Heidegger's insistence on reflection, presence, and questioning invites reconsideration of our immersion in systems that distance us from being. Ultimately, Heidegger challenges us to confront the profound, sometimes unsettling, mystery of existence, to dwell thoughtfully in the world, acknowledging finitude, embracing freedom, and cultivating authenticity amidst the currents of modern life. Jean-Paul Sartre. Born in 1905 in Paris, Jean-Paul Sartre emerged as a towering figure in 20th-century philosophy, literature, and political thought. A child of intellectual curiosity and solitude, he navigated a Europe scarred by 2 world wars, shaping his vision of human freedom amidst chaos. His life intertwined with fellow thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir, forming a crucible of existential inquiry that questioned the very essence of being. Sartre's work arose from the existentialist movement, which sought to confront human existence in its raw immediacy. France, grappling with post-war reconstruction and moral ambiguity, provided fertile ground for his insistence on radical freedom and personal responsibility. His literature, novels, plays, and essays served as vessels for philosophical exploration, rendering abstract thought tangible through lived experience. Central to Sartre's philosophy is the notion that existence precedes essence. Humans are not defined by predetermined nature, but by their choices, and through these choices, they craft meaning in an indifferent universe. This radical freedom carries the weight of absolute responsibility. To act is to acknowledge the absence of inherent guidelines, and to forge one's moral path. Yet tension permeates his thought. The freedom he extols clashes with the burden it imposes. The responsibility of creating oneself can lead to anguish, despair, or denial. Sartre wrestled with the limits of individual liberty against societal constraints, war, and political engagement. Today, Sartre resonates in debates over autonomy, identity, and ethical responsibility. From artificial intelligence ethics to social justice, his insistence on conscious choice challenges contemporary audiences to reflect on their complicity and agency. In the final measure, Sartre reminds us that life is an ongoing act of creation, an invitation to embrace freedom with courage, confronting the void not with despair, but with deliberate, conscious authorship of our own existence. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir, born in 1908 in Paris, emerged as a towering intellect of the 20th century, intertwining philosophy, literature, and feminist thought. She navigated a world bound by rigid gender norms, becoming both a chronicler and critic of the structures that confine women's lives. In the post-World War II era, Europe grappled with reconstruction, existential despair, and shifting societal roles. De Beauvoir, immersed in the existentialist circles of Paris alongside Jean-Paul Sartre, questioned the very foundations of freedom, responsibility, and identity, probing the human condition from a perspective acutely attuned to gender. Her central thesis, most famously articulated in The Second Sex, posits that woman is not born but made, a social construct shaped by historical, cultural, and psychological forces. She challenges the notion of femininity as a natural essence, revealing how societal expectations impose roles that deny authentic freedom and self-definition. This radical insight created tension, confronting both the philosophical establishment and everyday assumptions about women's place in society. Her insistence on individual freedom clashed with tradition, eliciting resistance from those invested in preserving patriarchal structures. Today, de Beauvoir's reflections resonate in conversations about gender equality, identity politics, and autonomy. Her interrogation of social constructs anticipates debates over intersectionality, reproductive rights, and the ongoing struggle against systemic bias, offering tools to understand both overt and subtle forms of oppression. Ultimately, de Beauvoir invites us into a rigorous, self-reflective inquiry, to recognize the forces that shape us, to question inherited norms, and to claim the freedom that defines human existence. In her vision, liberation is neither gift nor accident, it is an ethical endeavor demanding courage, honesty, and relentless self-examination. Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was a French phenomenologist whose work reshaped 20th-century philosophy by insisting that perception forms the primary gateway to understanding reality. Born in 1908, he traversed the intellectual landscapes of existentialism, psychology, and art, bridging the tangible and the conceptual in a way that challenged traditional Cartesian thought. His writings illuminate the body not as a mere vessel for the mind, but as the central instrument through which the world becomes intelligible. In a post-war context, Merleau-Ponty emerged among thinkers wrestling with the aftermath of violence and the limits of rationalist frameworks. The intellectual climate demanded a philosophy attentive to human experience, to the lived body, and to the pre-reflective, situated ways we engage with the world. Amid the rise of abstract structuralism and scientific positivism, his insistence on the primacy of perception was radical, emphasizing lived experience over detached observation. At the core, Merleau-Ponty proposed that consciousness is always embodied, that we inhabit our perceptions, and that the world is inseparable from the perceiver. He rejected both reductionist empiricism and idealist abstraction, revealing a tension between objective knowledge and the inherently subjective, sensory engagement with reality. This tension resonates today in fields from cognitive science to digital design, where the interface between perception, embodiment, and understanding remains central. Virtual reality, AI, and human-computer interaction echo his insights. Knowledge is never neutral, and the body shapes thought in ways technology cannot yet fully replicate. Ultimately, Merleau-Ponty invites a renewed attentiveness to being in the world, suggesting that philosophy begins not in abstraction, but in the living, breathing encounter with the world that surrounds us. Ludwig Wittgenstein. Ludwig Wittgenstein, born in 1889 in Vienna, emerged as one of the most enigmatic and influential philosophers of the 20th century. He was a thinker whose life straddled the rigor of mathematics and the fluidity of language, producing works that continue to challenge and inspire. His early immersion in engineering and mathematics laid the groundwork for a mind attuned to precision, yet perpetually seeking the limits of what could be expressed. Wittgenstein's context is the intellectual ferment of early 20th century Europe, a time when logic, language, and the philosophy of mind were undergoing radical reevaluation. Influenced by Bertrand Russell and the burgeoning analytic tradition, he initially sought a perfect, logical structure for language that could mirror reality with absolute clarity. Yet the turbulence of 2 world wars and the shifting intellectual landscapes forced him to confront the inadequacy of such rigid frameworks. At the core of his thought is the idea that the meaning of language is not inherent, but arises from its use within specific life contexts. Words are embedded in forms of life. Understanding is less about abstract definitions and more about participation in human practices. He challenged the assumption that philosophical problems could be solved through mere analysis of words detached from everyday life. This generates a tension between his early logical precision and his later focus on ordinary language, reflecting a restless pursuit of truth where clarity and ambiguity coexist. It unsettles readers, forcing them to question not only the limits of language, but the limits of thought itself. In modern relevance, Wittgenstein's insights underpin debates in linguistics, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science, reminding us that communication is a living, context-dependent activity. His philosophy resonates with those grappling with meaning in an age of digital and global discourse. Ultimately, Wittgenstein compels us to recognize that some mysteries of thought cannot be solved. They can only be shown, lived, and carefully attended to within the textures of life. Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, a towering intellect of the 20th century, reshaped philosophy, logic, and social thought with a clarity that cut through the dense fog of tradition. Born in 1872 into an aristocratic British family, he carried both privilege and a sharp critical eye, turning inherited opportunity into a relentless pursuit of knowledge and truth. In an era dominated by rigid dogmas, both religious and political, Russell emerged as a voice of reason, challenging inherited beliefs while advocating for rational inquiry. His work in analytic philosophy, particularly in logic and the foundations of mathematics, sought not merely abstract precision, but a means to illuminate human understanding. Beyond academia, his social activism confronted war, tyranny, and injustice, showing that intellect without moral engagement is sterile. At the heart of Russell's philosophy lies a commitment to clarity, reason, and the courage to doubt. He believed that ideas must withstand scrutiny, that certainties should always be provisional, and that human happiness is inseparable from intellectual and moral freedom. Yet, this devotion to reason coexisted with the unsettling awareness that human nature is often irrational, prone to fear, superstition, and conflict. This tension between the ideal of reason and the stubborn persistence of folly defines much of his work. It compels us to examine the limits of knowledge, the responsibilities of the thinker, and the social implications of intellectual life. Today, Russell's insistence on critical thought, ethical responsibility, and skepticism toward dogma resonates amid the deluge of misinformation and ideological polarization. His legacy reminds us that reason is not an abstract pursuit but a practical instrument for living wisely and justly. In the end, Russell teaches that the examined life, though fraught with uncertainty, is the pathway to both personal and collective enlightenment. G. Moore. G. Moore, an English philosopher of the early 20th century, is widely celebrated for his rigorous defense of common sense and moral realism. Born in 1873, he challenged the prevailing currents of idealism, insisting that ordinary propositions about the world, such as, "Here is a hand," hold undeniable truth. In an era dominated by abstract philosophical systems, Moore's insistence on the evident and the concrete was revolutionary. He argued that philosophy should not obscure reality with speculative metaphysics, but rather clarify the certainties already available to human experience. His works, including the celebrated Principia Ethica, sought to ground ethics in objective goodness rather than subjective or naturalistic frameworks. At the heart of Moore's philosophy lies the core idea that some truths are self-evident. The naturalistic fallacy, his famous contribution, warned against equating moral goodness with natural properties, urging thinkers to recognize goodness as a unique, irreducible quality. Moore's method involved meticulous argumentation and a commitment to clarity, establishing a bridge between rigorous logic and the immediacy of lived experience. Yet, this philosophy invites tension. How can one reconcile the simplicity of self-evident truths with the complexity of moral dilemmas and societal change? Moore challenges thinkers to confront the gap between what seems certain and what is difficult to apply in practice, provoking reflection on the limits of reason and the subtleties of human judgment. In the modern world, Moore's insights continue to resonate, influencing analytic philosophy, ethics, and debates on moral objectivity. His work reminds us that clarity, precision, and fidelity to everyday experience are enduring philosophical virtues. Ultimately, G. Moore teaches that the philosophical pursuit is not solely to uncover new truths, but to recognize, defend, and articulate the truths already before us. Logical positivism. Logical positivism emerged in the early 20th century as a philosophical movement rooted in the Vienna Circle, emphasizing that meaningful statements must be either empirically verifiable or analytically true. It rejected metaphysics and speculative philosophy, insisting that only observable phenomena provide the foundation for knowledge. In a time when science was revolutionizing human understanding, logical positivism offered clarity and precision. Intellectuals sought a framework that could unify philosophy with the rigor of scientific methodology, responding to a world increasingly enamored with empirical discovery and technological progress. At its core, logical positivism asserts that language mirrors reality through logical analysis. Propositions must be either tautologies, grounded in formal logic, or empirically testable through observation. Statements about morality, aesthetics, or metaphysics, lacking verification, were deemed cognitively meaningless, though not necessarily valueless in practice. Yet, this insistence on verification revealed a tension. If the principle of verification itself cannot be empirically proven, does it escape its own standard? Furthermore, the rigid dismissal of metaphysical or ethical discourse risked neglecting aspects of human experience that elude empirical measurement yet shape our understanding of meaning and purpose. Today, logical positivism resonates subtly in scientific philosophy, analytic reasoning, and the analytic tradition in philosophy of language. Its legacy informs debates on evidence, clarity, and the demarcation of meaningful discourse, even as the movement's strict verificationism has softened under criticism. Ultimately, logical positivism challenges us to confront the boundaries of knowledge. It teaches that while certainty is elusive, the pursuit of clarity, empirical grounding, and logical coherence illuminates the path toward understanding, reminding us that philosophy, like science, thrives in the interplay between rigor and reflection. Vienna Circle. The Vienna Circle emerged in the early 20th century as a constellation of thinkers committed to redefining the boundaries of philosophy through logic, science, and empiricism. Comprising philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians, it sought clarity and rigor in thought, rejecting metaphysics as a source of unverifiable claims. Figures like Moritz Schlick, Rudolf Carnap, and Otto Neurath gathered in Vienna, forming a crucible for intellectual revolution. In the post-World War I context, Europe wrestled with disillusionment and the challenge of rebuilding knowledge on firm foundations. Traditional philosophies, steeped in abstraction, seemed inadequate for a world scarred by conflict and technological transformation. Against this backdrop, the Circle's insistence on logical analysis and scientific verification resonated as a method to ground human understanding in observable reality. At its core, the Circle promoted logical positivism, the conviction that statements must be either empirically verifiable or analytically true to possess meaning. Philosophy's task was thus reframed as the clarification of language and concepts rather than speculation on unobservable realms. Tension arose between the Circle's ideal of certainty and the messy, interpretive nature of human experience. Critics argued that not all meaningful questions yield to empirical scrutiny, and that language itself carries nuances beyond formal logic. This dialectic between rigorous structure and lived complexity revealed both the strength and the limitation of their program. Today, the Circle's legacy permeates analytic philosophy, philosophy of science, and the broader pursuit of rational inquiry. Their insistence on clarity and evidence continues to challenge thinkers to distinguish knowledge from belief in an age of information overload. In reflecting on the Vienna Circle, one discerns a timeless philosophical quest to reconcile reason with reality, to construct a framework in which truth is pursued without abandoning intellectual rigor or human curiosity. Analytic philosophy. Analytic philosophy emerged in the early 20th century as a rigorous approach to thinking, emphasizing clarity, logic, and precision in language. Its proponents sought to dissect philosophical problems into their most fundamental components, believing that many traditional debates were muddled by linguistic confusion or conceptual vagueness. Rooted in the works of Gottlob Frege, Bertrand Russell, and Ludwig Wittgenstein, This movement arose partly as a response to the sweeping idealism and metaphysical excesses of the 19th century. Philosophers turned their attention to language, logic, and mathematics, seeking tools to anchor philosophical inquiry in verifiable clarity rather than speculative abstraction. The cultural and intellectual context of the time, a world grappling with scientific advancements and the desire for exactitude, provided fertile ground for such a methodical approach. At its core, analytic philosophy champions the belief that many philosophical problems are solvable, or at least clarifiable, through careful analysis of language and logical structure. Arguments are dissected to reveal hidden assumptions, contradictions, or ambiguities, striving for precision and intellectual honesty. Yet this focus introduces tension. The pursuit of absolute clarity risks neglecting the richness of human experience, emotion, and broader existential questions. Critics argue that reducing philosophy to linguistic puzzles may render it abstractly elegant, but practically detached from life's messier realities. Today, analytic philosophy underpins much of contemporary philosophy, logic, linguistics, and cognitive science. Its methods influence how scholars approach ethics, epistemology, and even artificial intelligence, shaping debates with precision and rigor. Ultimately, analytic philosophy invites us to consider not only what we think, but how we express and examine our thoughts, challenging us to illuminate the shadows of ambiguity with the sharp light of reason. Ordinary language philosophy. Ordinary language philosophy emerged in the early 20th century as a reaction against abstract theorizing in philosophy. Its proponents argued that philosophical problems often dissolve when attention is given to the actual use of words in everyday contexts. Thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein and J.L. Austin championed this approach, asserting that clarity in language reflects clarity in thought. In context, this movement arose amidst a climate dominated by logical positivism and formal semantics. Philosophers sought certainty through symbolic logic, yet paradoxes and confusions persisted. Ordinary language philosophy offered a different lens. Instead of inventing ideal languages, it invited philosophers to observe ordinary speech, revealing hidden assumptions and overlooked nuances that give rise to philosophical puzzles. The core idea rests on the premise that meaning is inseparable from use. Words acquire significance not in isolation but through the practices, customs, and contexts in which they are employed. By examining how language functions in real-world settings, ordinary philosophical dilemmas, such as those concerning truth, knowledge, or obligation, often appear less mysterious and more tractable. Yet tension arises in balancing descriptive fidelity with philosophical rigor. Critics argue that merely cataloging usage risks neglecting deeper metaphysical questions or systematic theorizing. Ordinary language philosophy's insistence on contextual interpretation sometimes clashes with the desire for universal principles. Today, its relevance endures in ethics, law, and cognitive science, where subtle differences in phrasing can shape interpretation, decision-making, and understanding. By foregrounding the ordinary, it cultivates attentiveness to meaning in practice rather than abstraction. Ultimately, ordinary language philosophy reminds us that philosophy is not a flight from the familiar, but a disciplined attention to the world as we articulate it, urging reflection on how thought and speech are inseparably intertwined. American pragmatism. American pragmatism emerged at the turn of the 20th century, a philosophical movement that challenged abstract theorizing and sought practical consequences as the measure of truth. It was pioneered by thinkers such as Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, and John Dewey, each exploring how ideas function in lived experience rather than in isolation. In a period of rapid industrial growth, social upheaval, and scientific discovery, the United States demanded a philosophy that could navigate complexity and uncertainty. Traditional European metaphysics seemed distant and inert, while the American experiment required adaptable frameworks for knowledge and action. Pragmatism offered a method to assess beliefs by their tangible effects, rooting intellectual inquiry in the soil of everyday life. At its heart, pragmatism insists that ideas are instruments. Truth is not a fixed essence, but emerges through verification and practice. Knowledge gains meaning through outcomes, moral judgments through consequences, and theories through application. The mind is a tool, constantly tested and refined in interaction with the world. Yet tension arises between pragmatism's fluid conception of truth and the human desire for certainty. Skeptics worry that reducing ideas to practical results risks relativism, undermining enduring principles in favor of expediency. Can a society flourish if its moral compass shifts with circumstances, or does adaptability itself become the guiding norm? Today, pragmatism resonates in education, policy making, and technological ethics, emphasizing iterative solutions, evidence-based reasoning, and the social responsibility of ideas. Its insistence on practical verification aligns with scientific inquiry, democratic deliberation, and the challenges of global interdependence. Ultimately, American pragmatism reminds us that philosophy need not float above life in abstraction. It is a lived endeavor, a reflective art of thinking and action, and a compass for navigating the ever-changing terrain of human experience. Charles Sanders Peirce. Born in 1839, Charles Sanders Peirce was an American philosopher, logician, and scientist whose work bridged mathematics, philosophy, and semiotics. He pioneered pragmatism and developed a rigorous theory of science, leaving a legacy that profoundly shaped analytical philosophy and modern logic. In the intellectual climate of post-Civil War America, Peirce encountered a world grappling with rapid scientific advancements and the challenge of unifying empirical observation with philosophical reasoning. He worked at Harvard, the U.S. Coast Survey, and various academic circles, constantly questioning the foundations of knowledge and truth in a society increasingly enamored with certainty yet confronted by complexity. At the heart of Peirce's thought lies the idea that ideas are instruments of action. Truth is not static but emerges through inquiry, experimentation, and the communal testing of beliefs. His triadic model of science, icon, index, and symbol, reveals how meaning arises in layers, linking perception, interpretation, and communication. Yet tension permeated his life and work. Despite brilliance, he struggled for recognition, his writings scattered and underappreciated, and his radical ideas often clashed with contemporaneous academic norms. This tension between innovative thought and societal reception mirrors the broader philosophical struggle to reconcile theory with lived practice. Today, Peirce's insights inform fields as diverse as artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and semiotics, guiding how we structure knowledge, interpret data, and communicate meaning. His pragmatism resonates in an era where the utility of ideas often determines their survival. Ultimately, Peirce invites us to embrace inquiry not as a quest for absolute certainty, but as a dynamic, communal journey toward understanding, a philosophy that transforms thinking into action, and action into a perpetual search for truth. William James. Born in 1842, William James emerged as a pioneering force in philosophy and psychology, bridging the rigorous empiricism of science with the profound inquiries of human consciousness. He is often hailed as the father of American psychology, yet his influence stretches far beyond clinical laboratories into the very fabric of thought, belief, and experience. In an era when rigid rationalism dominated intellectual discourse, James introduced a fluid, human-centered perspective. He challenged the assumption that truth is immutable, instead proposing that beliefs are instruments for navigating life's uncertainties, validated through their practical consequences. At the heart of his philosophy lies pragmatism, the idea that ideas are meaningful only insofar as they make a tangible difference in lived experience. Knowledge is not a mirror reflecting a static reality, but a tool for action, for coping with the relentless flux of life. Yet his vision is not without tension. How does one reconcile the subjective richness of human experience with the objective demands of science? Can truth be both personal and universal? James embraced this tension, seeing it not as weakness, but as the very engine of inquiry, the spark that fuels reflection and growth. Today, his ideas resonate amid the complexities of modern life, where certainty is rare and adaptation is essential. From cognitive science to self-help literature, the pragmatic ethos of testing beliefs by their fruits continues to guide inquiry, ethics, and decision-making. Ultimately, James invites us into a contemplative partnership with reality, to experiment, to believe boldly, to revise relentlessly, and to acknowledge that understanding is a living, evolving engagement rather than a static possession. John Dewey. John Dewey was a pioneering American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer whose work reshaped the landscape of modern education. Born in 1859 in Burlington, Vermont, he became a leading figure in pragmatism, advocating that knowledge emerges through active experience rather than passive absorption. Dewey's influence extended from philosophy into pedagogy, insisting that schools should be dynamic communities for experiential learning. In an era dominated by rigid rote memorization, Dewey envisioned education as a process intimately tied to life itself. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were marked by industrialization and urban expansion, and Dewey recognized that traditional schooling often failed to prepare individuals for the complexities of a democratic society. He argued that education must cultivate critical thinking, social responsibility, and problem-solving abilities, not merely the mechanical acquisition of facts. At the core of Dewey's philosophy lies the principle that learning occurs through doing. Education should be a laboratory where students explore, question, and experiment, guided by inquiry rather than authority. Knowledge is not static. It is a living, evolving product of interaction between the learner and their environment, a reflection of pragmatist thought that values action and consequence over abstract theorization. Yet this vision inherently clashes with entrenched traditions and institutional inertia. The tension between progressive, student-centered methods and conventional, test-driven approaches remains a persistent challenge, highlighting the friction between innovation and the comfort of familiar structures. Today, Dewey's ideas resonate in project-based learning, collaborative classrooms, and democratic pedagogies. They remind educators that fostering curiosity, empathy, and adaptability is essential in preparing citizens for an interconnected, rapidly changing world. Ultimately, Dewey compels us to reconceive education as an active, participatory journey, where thinking and living are inseparable, and every classroom becomes a microcosm of a democratic society. Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault, a French philosopher and historian, revolutionized the way we perceive power, knowledge, and society. Born in 1926, his work traversed disciplines, intertwining philosophy, sociology, and critical theory. Foucault's investigations into institutions such as prisons, hospitals, and asylums revealed that power is not merely held but exercised through subtle, pervasive networks that shape human behavior and thought. In a post-World War II Europe, the trauma of totalitarian regimes and the restructuring of social institutions provided fertile ground for Foucault's inquiry. He questioned the accepted narratives of truth and the mechanisms that enforce social norms, exposing the silent operations of control that govern everyday life. His historical analysis traced how societies define madness, criminality, and sexuality, illustrating the contingent nature of moral and scientific knowledge. At the heart of Foucault's philosophy lies the core idea that power and knowledge are inseparable. Knowledge is never neutral, and power is omnipresent, operating not only through laws, but also through discourse, surveillance, and the internalization of norms. This decentralized view challenges traditional hierarchies and the notion of objective truth, positioning human behavior within complex webs of regulation. Foucault's work illuminates tension between individual autonomy and societal structures. While humans seek freedom and authenticity, they are simultaneously constituted and constrained by invisible regimes of knowledge that dictate what is acceptable, normal, or true. In today's digital age, his insights resonate profoundly. Social media, algorithms, and surveillance technologies mirror his observations. Power now operates through information, shaping desires, behaviors, and perceptions at an unprecedented scale. Ultimately, Foucault compels us to question not only who wields power, but how it permeates the ordinary. Understanding these dynamics invites vigilance, critical reflection, and a deeper consciousness of our place within society's intricate machinery. Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida, born in 1930 in Algeria, emerged as one of the most provocative and influential philosophers of the 20th century. His writings challenged conventional notions of language, meaning, and textual authority, compelling readers to reconsider the relationship between words and the world they attempt to describe. In post-World War II France, intellectual life grappled with existentialism, structuralism, and the lingering trauma of conflict and colonial tensions. Derrida's work arose in this ferment, questioning the very frameworks through which philosophy had traditionally asserted certainty. His early engagement with phenomenology and linguistics provided the foundation for a radical rethinking of how texts communicate and conceal meaning. At the heart of Derrida's philosophy is the concept of deconstruction, the idea that texts contain internal contradictions that undermine their apparent coherence. Meaning is never fixed but perpetually deferred, always contingent upon the interplay of language and context. This notion destabilizes hierarchical oppositions, presence/absence, speech/writing, self/other, revealing the instability at the core of human understanding. Yet this approach creates tension. By undermining absolute truths, deconstruction can appear to dissolve certainty itself, leaving interpretation open-ended and at times disorienting. Critics argue it risks nihilism, while advocates see it as a liberation from dogmatic rigidity. In contemporary discourse, Derrida's insights resonate across literary theory, law, politics, and digital communication. From analyzing political rhetoric to interpreting digital media, his thought illuminates the multiplicity of meanings and the ethical responsibility of interpretation in a hyper-connected world. Ultimately, Derrida invites us to embrace ambiguity, to read critically, and to recognize that understanding is an ongoing negotiation, not a destination. His philosophy is a call to dwell in the complexity of thought, acknowledging the perpetual interplay of absence and presence that shapes human consciousness. Gilles Deleuze. Gilles Deleuze, a French philosopher of the 20th century, traversed the landscapes of metaphysics, literature, and cinema, leaving a radical imprint on contemporary thought. Born in 1925, his work challenged conventional frameworks of philosophy, insisting on difference over identity and process over static being. Emerging from the post-war existential and structuralist climate of France, Deleuze engaged with thinkers such as Spinoza, Nietzsche, and Bergson, while simultaneously dialoguing critically with psychoanalysis and Marxism. His ideas responded to a world in flux, grappling with political upheaval, technological advancement, and the crisis of representation. At the heart of his philosophy lies the notion of difference and repetition, where reality is understood as a perpetual unfolding, a network of forces rather than a collection of fixed entities. He reconceived desire not as lack but as productive force, shaping both social structures and individual subjectivities. The rhizome metaphor epitomizes his vision, non-hierarchical, interconnected, and capable of multiple entryways and exits. It subverts linear, centralized models of knowledge. Yet, Deleuze's thought wrestles with tension between abstraction and lived experience, between the deterritorialization of ideas and the constraints imposed by existing social orders. This tension reflects a constant negotiation between freedom and structure, creation and limitation. In contemporary discourse, Deleuze's concepts animate critical theory, digital culture, and ecological thought, offering tools to interrogate systems of power, identity, and connectivity. His insights illuminate the potential for reimagining knowledge, art, and community beyond rigid frameworks. Ultimately, Deleuze invites us to embrace becoming over being, to see the world not as a static object but as a dynamic process, ever capable of transformation and invention. Jean-François Lyotard. Jean-François Lyotard, born in 1924 in France, emerged as one of the most incisive voices of late 20th century philosophy, particularly in the realm of postmodern thought. His work traversed the boundaries of philosophy, sociology, and aesthetics, positioning him as both critic and chronicler of an age questioning the certainties of grand narratives. In the wake of World War II and the tumult of decolonization, intellectuals confronted the erosion of Enlightenment ideals. Lyotard wrote against the backdrop of a world scarred by the promises of progress and reason, seeking to diagnose the crisis of legitimation that haunted modern societies. He observed that the great meta-narratives, the stories of universal truth, historical inevitability, and emancipatory reason, were losing their persuasive force in the face of plural experiences and cultural fractures. At the core of his thought is the assertion that knowledge and meaning are no longer legitimized by overarching narratives, but through local, context-specific language games. Truth becomes contingent, dispersed, and performative, resisting reduction to totalizing ideologies. This decentralization challenges the authority of institutions and disciplines that once claimed universal relevance. Yet this stance produces tension. The liberatory promise of multiplicity confronts the human desire for coherence and certainty. Without grand narratives, society risks fragmentation, disorientation, and ethical ambiguity, even as it gains epistemic freedom. In contemporary discourse, Lyotard's insights resonate in debates over identity, technology, and information proliferation. The postmodern condition he described anticipates the complexities of social media, globalized knowledge, and contested truths, demanding critical literacy and ethical navigation. Ultimately, Lyotard invites reflection on the limits of universal claims, urging a philosophy attuned to diversity, contingency, and the irreducible singularity of human experience. In embracing the small stories, we confront both the peril and the promise of a world without totalizing certainties. Post-structuralism. Post-structuralism emerged as a critical response to the certainties promised by structuralism, challenging the notion that meaning could ever be fixed or absolute. It arose in the mid-20th century, shaped by thinkers who questioned the rigid frameworks that claimed to decode language, culture, and society with scientific precision. In a world seeking definitive structures, post-structuralism reminds us that our interpretations are provisional, contingent upon context and perspective. Words do not merely denote. They signify in shifting constellations, their meanings perpetually deferred and unstable. Human experience, once mapped neatly into categories, resists such containment, revealing the gaps, contradictions, and multiplicities underlying even the most seemingly coherent systems. The core idea revolves around the instability of meaning. Language is not a transparent medium. It mediates power, constructs identity, and shapes reality itself. Truth is not discovered but performed, contingent upon discourse, history, and ideology. Knowledge, therefore, is never neutral. It is always embedded within complex networks of influence. This tension between structure and instability generates both liberation and uncertainty. It destabilizes authority, opening space for marginalized voices and alternative interpretations, yet it simultaneously challenges the desire for certainty, leaving us suspended in ambiguity. In contemporary society, post-structuralist thought informs literary criticism, cultural studies, and critical theory, guiding examinations of media, law, and social hierarchies. Its insistence on questioning assumptions resonates in an era dominated by information overload, identity politics, and the fluidity of digital culture. Ultimately, post-structuralism invites a philosophical humility, to embrace the provisional, to read against the grain, and to recognize that meaning is never handed to us. It must always be sought, negotiated, and reimagined. Structuralism. Language, culture, and thought are not isolated phenomena. They exist within systems of signs that give meaning through relations. At its core, structuralism asserts that understanding these underlying structures allows us to interpret the surface-level expressions of human activity. It emerged in the early 20th century, shaped by linguists like Ferdinand de Saussure, who argued that words acquire meaning not intrinsically but through their difference from other words. This notion extended to myths, literature, and social practices, suggesting that beneath the apparent chaos of culture lies an ordered framework. The context of structuralism is deeply philosophical yet practical, bridging linguistics, anthropology, and literary criticism. Claude Lévi-Strauss applied it to myths, demonstrating that seemingly disparate narratives across societies share universal structures. Roland Barthes and others translated structuralist principles into literary theory, emphasizing patterns over individual creativity. The movement thrives on the idea that human cognition itself organizes experience according to binary oppositions, a principle that illuminates thought as a system rather than as mere personal reflection. Structuralism posits that meaning arises from relational differences rather than intrinsic qualities. Every symbol, gesture, or text gains significance through its place in a broader system. The tension lies in the reductionist critique. Critics argue that by privileging structure over agency, structuralism risks ignoring human individuality and historical contingency. Despite critiques, its modern relevance endures in semiotics, AI language models, and cross-cultural studies, where pattern recognition remains central. Structuralism invites us to perceive the invisible scaffolding beneath human experience, revealing coherence where randomness appears. Ultimately, structuralism challenges us to see that reality is both constructed and interpretable, a lattice of relationships in which meaning perpetually emerges from context, difference, and structure itself. Critical theory. Critical theory emerged in the early 20th century as a response to societal inequities, primarily through the lens of the Frankfurt School, where scholars sought to understand the interplay of culture, politics, and economy. It asserts that social structures are not neutral, but are imbued with power dynamics that perpetuate inequality. In an era marked by industrial expansion and ideological conflict, thinkers like Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno observed the rise of mass culture and authoritarian tendencies. Their work was not merely analytical, but inherently moral, interrogating how reason itself could be used as an instrument of domination rather than liberation. At its essence, critical theory insists that knowledge must serve emancipation. It challenges the assumption that society is naturally ordered and instead probes the mechanisms by which norms, institutions, and language maintain hierarchies. It posits that awareness without action is insufficient. Critique must lead to transformation. Yet this pursuit generates tension. The theory oscillates between academic abstraction and activist impulse, between diagnosing oppression and prescribing change. Critics argue that its abstract frameworks risk detachment from lived realities, while proponents maintain that systemic critique is impossible without theoretical depth. Today, critical theory resonates through movements addressing systemic racism, economic inequality, and digital surveillance. Its insights illuminate how technology and culture continue to shape consciousness, revealing that domination can be subtle as well as overt. Ultimately, critical theory invites a contemplative vigilance. The act of questioning, when sustained, becomes a moral imperative. It reminds us that society is neither fixed nor neutral, and that intellectual rigor carries the responsibility of ethical engagement. Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School emerged in early 20th century Germany, a confluence of Marxist thought and critical theory, where philosophers, sociologists, and cultural critics sought to understand why the promises of enlightenment and industrial progress had not culminated in human emancipation. Figures like Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse dissected society with a lens that merged philosophy, psychology, and culture, probing the subtle mechanisms of domination beyond mere economic exploitation. Amidst the turbulence of Weimar Germany, fascism, and the rise of mass media, the Frankfurt School contextualized its inquiry in the shadow of authoritarianism. They examined how culture itself could be a vehicle of social control, observing how entertainment, news, and ideology could pacify critical thought while reproducing hierarchies of power. At its core, the school's idea was the critical interrogation of modernity. Reason, once heralded as the liberator of humanity, was recast as a double-edged instrument, capable of both emancipation and domination. They argued that cultural industries and technological rationality subtly reinforce conformity, dampening individual autonomy and collective imagination. Yet tension pervades their work. The hope of liberation confronts the despair of manipulation. The very tools of enlightenment, reason, science, and culture, can become instruments of repression. This dialectical struggle between potential freedom and latent control defines the school's philosophical heartbeat. In contemporary society, the Frankfurt School resonates profoundly. Social media algorithms, consumer culture, and political spectacle echo their warnings about the subtle perpetuation of power through culture. Their critique encourages vigilance and reflection, urging humanity to reclaim critical thought as an emancipatory force. Ultimately, the Frankfurt School invites a continuous philosophical conversation, to question, to resist, and to envision a society where reason serves liberation rather than domination. Jürgen Habermas. Jürgen Habermas, born in 1929 in Düsseldorf, Germany, emerged as one of the most profound philosophers and sociologists of the 20th century, carving a path in critical theory and communicative philosophy. A student of the Frankfurt School, he inherited the legacy of Adorno and Horkheimer, but sought to move beyond their pessimism, focusing on the potential of rational discourse to foster democratic societies. Post-war Germany, grappling with totalitarian remnants and the moral void of the Holocaust, provided the crucible for Habermas's thought. In a world where ideologies had failed catastrophically, he envisioned a framework where reason and dialogue could reconstruct public life, transcending the limitations of power and domination. At the heart of his philosophy lies the concept of the public sphere, a space in which individuals engage in rational critical debate, free from coercion, aiming at consensus through argumentation rather than force. Communication is not merely a tool, but the very medium through which democracy is realized and social integration is maintained. Yet, tension arises between ideal and reality. Mass media, systemic inequalities, and strategic manipulation of discourse challenge the possibility of genuine consensus. Habermas's theory confronts the gap between normative aspirations and the practical distortions of communicative action in a complex, mediated society. Today, his insights resonate amid digital public spheres, social networks, and polarized discourse. The challenge of achieving authentic dialogue while navigating algorithmic influence echoes Habermas's concerns about rational critical deliberation. His work invites reflection on civic responsibility, ethical communication, and the resilience of democratic norms in the 21st century. Ultimately, Habermas compels us to see discourse not merely as conversation, but as a moral and political project, urging a persistent striving toward reasoned consensus as the foundation of a just society. Hannah Arendt. Born in 1906 in Linden, Germany, Hannah Arendt navigated the turbulence of the 20th century, witnessing the rise of totalitarian regimes and the horrors of the Holocaust, experiences that profoundly shaped her intellect and moral inquiry. She studied philosophy under Martin Heidegger and Karl Jaspers, grounding her in existential and political thought, yet her life was soon displaced by exile as a Jewish thinker in Nazi Germany. Arendt's exploration of the human condition was inseparable from historical catastrophe. She chronicled the collapse of moral frameworks and the fragility of political institutions, observing how ordinary individuals could participate in extraordinary evil without overt malice. Her writing on totalitarianism revealed the mechanisms through which ideology and bureaucracy extinguish personal judgment, emphasizing the perils of obedience untempered by conscience. Central to her thought is the notion of the banality of evil, a stark warning that monstrous acts can arise not from pathological hatred, but from thoughtless conformity and moral disengagement. Arendt argued that political life demands active reflection, civic courage, and the capacity to question authority, a refusal to abdicate responsibility in the face of systemic oppression. Yet this insight carries tension. It challenges the comforting idea that evil is always exceptional, forcing confrontation with the unsettling potential for complicity embedded within ordinary life. How can freedom exist when structures incentivize passivity, and morality appears optional under coercive regimes? In today's fragmented political landscapes, Arendt's work resonates profoundly. The rise of populism, surveillance, and ideological polarization underscores her call for vigilance, critical thinking, and personal accountability. Ultimately, her legacy is a meditation on human responsibility, to think, to judge, and to act with integrity amid the precariousness of history and the recurring shadows of power. Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, born in 1905 in St. Petersburg, Russia, witnessed the collapse of a society she perceived as oppressive and collectivist. Her immigration to the United States marked the beginning of a lifelong pursuit to articulate a philosophy that championed individual freedom and rational self-interest above all. Rand's work emerged against the backdrop of tumultuous early 20th century politics, from the Russian Revolution to the Great Depression in America. She observed the tensions between state power and personal autonomy, translating these into novels that fuse storytelling with philosophical argumentation. Through her characters, she dramatized the moral and practical triumphs of those who dared to think independently, while condemning the moral compromises of those who surrendered to collective demands. At the heart of her philosophy, objectivism, lies the conviction that reason is man's only guide to action, and that pursuing one's own rational self-interest constitutes the highest moral purpose. She asserted that individual achievement and creativity are not merely personal goods, but the engines of societal progress. Yet, Her ideas provoke tension. The glorification of self-interest challenges deeply held beliefs in altruism and communal responsibility. Critics argue that her rejection of collectivism risks ethical solipsism, while supporters celebrate her unflinching defense of liberty and achievement. This friction between radical individualism and societal expectation fuels enduring debates. In today's world, marked by complex interdependence and global crisis, Rand's insistence on personal responsibility, entrepreneurial courage, and intellectual integrity resonates sharply with those seeking autonomy in an increasingly regulated society. Ultimately, engaging with Rand compels reflection on the balance between self and society, questioning whether the pursuit of one's own rational vision can coexist with the ethical demands of the collective, and what it truly means to live as an autonomous moral agent. Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss was a German-American political philosopher whose work delved into classical political thought and the tension between reason and revelation. Born in 1899 in Germany, Strauss fled the rise of Nazism and established himself in the United States, where his lectures at the University of Chicago influenced generations of political theorists. He sought to recover a rigorous engagement with philosophical texts, emphasizing the careful reading of ancient thinkers often overshadowed by modern interpretations. Strauss operated in the context of a 20th century grappling with relativism, historicism, and the decline of faith in enduring moral truths. Modern political discourse, fragmented and often reductionist, contrasted sharply with the layered subtleties of classical philosophy he championed. Against this backdrop, Strauss argued that understanding the ancients was not mere historical curiosity, but a necessity for discerning the ethical and political foundations of society. At the core of Strauss's philosophy lies the belief that great texts conceal multiple levels of meaning, accessible only through disciplined interpretation. He contended that political life requires a balance between the pursuit of truth and the practicalities of governance, warning that modernity's embrace of unbridled rationalism and moral relativism threatens the cultivation of wisdom. The tension in Strauss's work emerges between the esoteric and the exoteric, between hidden philosophical truths and the necessities of public discourse. This duality challenges both the scholar and the citizen to navigate between comprehension and prudence, between integrity and survival within civic life. Strauss's relevance endures in contemporary debates over liberal democracy, education, and moral responsibility. His insistence on the careful reading of texts, on questioning the complacencies of modern thought, illuminates the perennial struggle to reconcile human reason with moral order. Ultimately, Strauss invites reflection on how the past informs the ethical contours of the present. Alasdair MacIntyre. Alasdair MacIntyre, a Scottish philosopher, emerged as a towering figure in moral and political philosophy, particularly noted for his critique of modern ethical theory. His work, spanning decades, challenges the prevailing notions of moral relativism and fragmented ethical discourse. Born in 1929, MacIntyre's intellectual journey traversed analytic philosophy, Marxism, and Thomistic thought, culminating in a unique synthesis that confronts contemporary moral confusion. In the context of post-Enlightenment Western thought, MacIntyre observed a profound erosion of communal moral frameworks. Philosophical traditions that once anchored human action in teleology and virtue had given way to emotivism, where moral judgments were reduced to expressions of preference or sentiment. This historical shift provided fertile ground for his seminal work, After Virtue, where he diagnoses the ailments of modern moral life with both historical rigor and philosophical clarity. At the core of MacIntyre's philosophy lies the revival of Aristotelian virtue ethics within the structure of social practices and narrative traditions. He posits that human flourishing is intelligible only within communities that cultivate shared goods and sustain coherent narratives of life. Moral reasoning, therefore, cannot be atomized from the historical and social contexts that give it meaning. Yet tension arises between this ideal of communal virtue and the prevailing ethos of individualism. Modernity, with its emphasis on personal autonomy and bureaucratic rationality, resists the cultivation of shared moral ends, creating a persistent friction between aspiration and reality. MacIntyre's insights resonate in contemporary discourse on ethics, politics, and education, where questions of character formation, civic responsibility, and the common good remain urgent. His critique invites reflection on how fragmented moral perspectives might be reoriented toward coherent, life-affirming practices. Ultimately, MacIntyre challenges us to confront the moral disarray of our age not with despair, but with a disciplined pursuit of virtue, historical consciousness, and the cultivation of narrative integrity in human life. Peter Singer. Peter Singer, an Australian moral philosopher, emerged as a central figure in applied ethics, advocating for the extension of moral consideration beyond human beings to all sentient life. He gained prominence with his groundbreaking work, Animal Liberation, challenging conventional human-centered ethics and compelling society to reconsider the moral status of animals. Singer's arguments unfolded against a backdrop of rising awareness of animal rights and global discussions on poverty and ethical responsibility. In the late 20th century, industrial farming, environmental degradation, and global inequities framed the urgency of his philosophical interventions. His work forced readers to confront uncomfortable truths about everyday practices and societal norms. At the heart of Singer's philosophy lies the principle of equal consideration of interests. If a being can suffer, its suffering matters morally. He extends utilitarian reasoning, emphasizing minimizing suffering and maximizing well-being, irrespective of species boundaries. This radical reorientation of moral obligation challenges ingrained anthropocentrism and reshapes ethical deliberation. Yet tension arises in balancing theoretical rigor with practical applicability. Critics question whether his utilitarian framework can adequately account for individual rights, cultural differences, or emotional bonds. The rigor of logic often confronts the fluidity of lived human experience, creating ethical dilemmas that resist simple resolution. In the modern era, Singer's ideas resonate through debates on factory farming, climate change, global poverty, and bioethics. The ethical imperative to act in the face of preventable suffering informs policy, philanthropy, and personal lifestyle choices, revealing philosophy as a lived practice rather than abstract speculation. Ultimately, Singer compels a reflection on moral courage, to question inherited norms, to confront suffering wherever it occurs, and to embrace a life guided by reasoned empathy, reminding us that ethical responsibility is universal, demanding, and profoundly transformative. Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn, a 20th-century philosopher of science, reshaped our understanding of scientific progress. His work challenged the conventional notion that science advances through a steady accumulation of knowledge. Instead, he argued that paradigms, widely accepted theories and frameworks, govern scientific inquiry until anomalies accumulate and provoke revolutionary shifts. In an era dominated by logical positivism and the ideal of objective, linear progress, Kuhn introduced a disruptive perspective. Science was no longer a mere march toward truth, but a human endeavor shaped by consensus, culture, and the limitations of prevailing models. His ideas emerged from careful historical analysis, drawing on the evolution of physics, chemistry, and astronomy to reveal the nonlinear rhythm of discovery. At the heart of Kuhn's philosophy lies the notion of the paradigm shift. Scientific revolutions occur not simply through the gradual addition of facts, but when foundational assumptions are overturned, giving rise to new frameworks that redefine problems and solutions. Normal science, for Kuhn, is largely puzzle-solving within accepted paradigms, while revolutionary science breaks and replaces those boundaries. Yet this view generates tension. Critics argue that it risks relativism, suggesting that scientific truth is contingent upon social agreement rather than empirical reality. The tension between objective evidence and interpretive frameworks remains unresolved, inviting both admiration and skepticism. Today, Kuhn's insights resonate across disciplines, from technology and medicine to social sciences, illuminating how change often emerges through disruption rather than continuity. Recognizing paradigm shifts fosters critical thinking, adaptability, and humility in the face of knowledge's inherent impermanence. In reflecting on Kuhn, we see science not as a static repository of facts but as a dynamic, human story of discovery, conflict, and transformation. Karl Popper. Karl Popper, a 20th-century philosopher, emerged as a formidable voice in the philosophy of science, challenging prevailing notions of certainty and dogma. He was born in Vienna in 1902, a time steeped in intellectual ferment, where the shadows of positivism and historicism loomed over academia. Amid this atmosphere, Popper sought clarity in the murky waters of scientific and social theory. He contended that knowledge progresses not through verification, but through falsification. No theory, however elegant, could ever be proven definitively true. Its endurance depends solely on surviving rigorous attempts at refutation. In this light, science becomes an iterative dialogue with reality, each failure illuminating the path forward. At the heart of his philosophy lies a paradoxical tension. Human reason strives for certainty, yet the very nature of knowledge demands humility and acceptance of fallibility. Popper's insistence on the provisional status of theories challenges both blind adherence to ideology and the comfort of absolute truths. Today, Popper's ideas resonate beyond laboratories. In political discourse, his critique of historicism warns against deterministic ideologies. In technology, his principles guide experimental methodologies and critical thinking frameworks. The scientific community, educators, and policymakers continue to grapple with the implications of embracing uncertainty while pursuing progress. Ultimately, Popper invites us into a philosophy of vigilant inquiry, to cherish our theories yet remain prepared to abandon them, to build institutions resilient to dogma, and to cultivate a culture where questions are valued more than answers. In acknowledging the limits of our knowledge, we paradoxically open the door to its expansion. Paul Feyerabend. Paul Feyerabend, a 20th-century philosopher of science, challenged the rigid boundaries of scientific methodology and epistemology. Born in Vienna in 1924, he became a provocative voice against the idea that science operates under fixed, universal rules, insisting instead that knowledge grows through pluralism and methodological anarchy. Emerging from the post-war intellectual climate, Feyerabend reacted to the dominance of logical positivism and the search for absolute scientific truth. He argued that historical developments in science, Galileo's telescopic discoveries, the quantum revolution, often succeeded not by strict adherence to method but by breaking, bending, or ignoring prevailing rules. Science, he suggested, is a human enterprise shaped by culture, power, and creativity as much as by logic or evidence. At the heart of his philosophy lies the idea that anything goes. He claimed that dogmatic adherence to methodological norms limits innovation, suppresses alternative viewpoints, and obscures the sociocultural dimensions of knowledge. Progress emerges from contradiction, disruption, and interplay among diverse perspectives. This position generates tension, appearing to flirt with relativism or epistemic chaos. Critics argue that without some standards, truth risks becoming arbitrary. Feyerabend countered that rigid prescriptions often hinder rather than guide scientific advancement, and that the apparent chaos of competing theories ultimately fosters resilience and discovery. Today, his thought resonates in debates over interdisciplinary research, science policy, and the role of indigenous and non-Western knowledge systems. His pluralistic ethos challenges hierarchical models of expertise and invites openness to multiple ways of knowing. Feyerabend leaves us with a provocative lesson. The pursuit of understanding flourishes not in obedience to method, but in the courage to question, disrupt, and embrace the multiplicity of human inquiry. Cornel West. He was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1953, raised in Sacramento, educated at Harvard and Princeton, and emerged as one of the most visible public intellectuals in America. A philosopher by training, a preacher by temperament, and a critic by vocation, he has spent decades speaking in lecture halls, churches, protests, and television studios. His life unfolds against the long aftershock of the civil rights movement. America promised equality in law yet preserved inequality in practice. Universities professionalized philosophy, politics hardened into spectacle, and religion often retreated from social struggle. In that landscape, he refused to choose between scholarship and street-level witness. At the center of his thought stands a demanding fusion: prophetic Christianity, democratic socialism, and the black radical tradition. He argues that justice is what love looks like in public. Philosophy, for him, is not sterile analysis, but a form of moral awakening. To think clearly is to feel deeply. To love truth is to confront power. Yet tension follows him. Institutions prize decorum. He prizes candor. Party politics demands loyalty. He demands integrity. Critics call him impractical or theatrical. Admirers see courage where others see provocation. In an age of widening inequality, resurgent nationalism, and algorithmic distraction, his insistence on moral seriousness cuts against the grain. He asks citizens to measure success not by wealth or dominance, but by care for the vulnerable. His voice reminds us that democracy without compassion decays, and that hope, disciplined by struggle, remains a revolutionary force. Judith Butler. A philosopher who unsettled certainties, Judith Butler reshaped contemporary thought by arguing that what we take to be natural in gender is, in fact, performed. Born in 1956 in Cleveland, Butler would become one of the most influential theorists of the late 20th century, especially after the publication of Gender Trouble in 1990. Emerging from conversations in continental philosophy, feminism, and queer activism, Butler drew deeply from thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. The late 20th century was marked by struggles over identity, power, and recognition. Feminism sought liberation, yet often relied on stable definitions of woman. Butler stepped into this debate not to dismiss feminism, but to question its foundations. The central claim was radical: gender is not an inner truth expressed outwardly, but a repeated set of acts, gestures, and norms that create the illusion of a stable identity. Performativity, as Butler described it, means that identity is constituted through repetition within structures of power. We become intelligible subjects by citing social scripts, even as we might subtly revise them. Yet tension followed. Critics worried that if gender is constructed, political solidarity dissolves. Others accused Butler of abstraction, of obscuring lived experience behind dense prose. The debate revealed a deeper anxiety: if identity is not fixed, where do we stand? Today, conversations about transgender rights, non-binary identities, and bodily autonomy echo Butler's insights. In courts, classrooms, and online spaces, the question persists: who has the authority to define a life? Butler's work endures, because it does not offer comfort. It offers a task, the courage to rethink what we call natural, and to recognize that freedom may lie in the fragile space where norms are repeated differently. Frantz Fanon. Born in 1925 in Martinique, Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist, philosopher, and revolutionary thinker whose words would outlive empires. Trained in medicine in France and later working in colonial Algeria, he observed not only physical wounds, but the invisible fractures carved into the human psyche by domination. His life moved between clinic and battlefield, between careful diagnosis and urgent rebellion. The 20th century was a furnace of collapsing empires. European colonial powers claimed civilizing missions, while structuring racial hierarchies that deformed both colonizer and colonized. In Algeria, where Fanon practiced psychiatry during the War of Independence, the violence of occupation was not abstract theory, it was daily reality. Hospitals filled with trauma that could not be separated from politics. Fanon's central insight was stark. Colonialism is not merely economic exploitation, it is a total system that invades language, identity, and self-perception. In works such as Black Skin, White Masks, and The Wretched of the Earth, he argued that oppression manufactures inferiority, and liberation must therefore be psychological as well as political. Freedom requires the reclamation of selfhood. Yet his thought carries tension. He defended revolutionary violence as a cleansing force, a controversial claim that unsettles readers who seek liberation without bloodshed. Was violence a tragic necessity or a dangerous romanticism? The question remains unsettled. Today, long after formal empires have fallen, debates on race, identity, and systemic power echo Fanon's concerns. Structural inequality, cultural alienation, and internalized prejudice persist in new forms. Fanon compels us to ask, what does it mean to be truly free, not only in law, but in consciousness? Slavoj Zizek. He speaks rapidly, gestures wildly, and insists that the most dangerous illusions are the ones we mistake for common sense. Slavoj Zizek is not merely a philosopher. He is a cultural critic who treats cinema, politics, and everyday jokes as laboratories of ideology. For him, the trivial detail, a commercial, a blockbuster film, a casual phrase, reveals the architecture of belief beneath modern life. Born in Slovenia and shaped by the collapse of Yugoslavia, Zizek emerged at the crossroads of Marxism, German idealism, and psychoanalysis. Drawing heavily from Hegel, Marx, and Lacan, he argues that ideology does not simply deceive us. It structures our reality. We may believe we are cynical, detached, immune to propaganda, yet we continue to act as if we believe. That gap between what we think and what we do is where ideology thrives. His core insight is unsettling. Ideology persists not because we are ignorant, but because we know very well and still comply. We laugh at consumer culture while compulsively consuming. We criticize capitalism while fearing any real alternative. For Zizek, this contradiction is not hypocrisy. It is the logic of contemporary power. The tension in his thought lies between critique and action. If every system absorbs resistance, how can change occur? Zizek refuses comforting answers. He provokes, exaggerates, even scandalizes, to force confrontation with our hidden assumptions. In an age of digital spectacle, culture wars, and algorithmic persuasion, Zizek's work remains a reminder. The true battleground is not only in institutions, but in the fantasies that silently organize our desires. Byung-Chul Han. He was born in Seoul and trained first as a metallurgist before turning to philosophy in Germany, a shift from the hardness of steel to the malleability of thought. Over time, he became one of the most incisive interpreters of the psychic atmosphere of the 21st century. Writing in the wake of digital acceleration, neoliberal expansion, and the quiet erosion of communal life, he observes not revolutions but subtle transformations. The factory has dissolved into the laptop. The overseer has migrated inside the self. We inhabit a world that celebrates transparency, positivity, and endless communication, yet something essential feels diminished. His central claim is unsettling. Power no longer primarily represses, it seduces. We are no longer obedient subjects, but achievement subjects, entrepreneurs of the self, who exploit our own capacities in the name of freedom. Burnout replaces rebellion. Depression becomes the pathology of a society that commands constant performance. In this regime, silence, negativity, and contemplation appear almost subversive. The tension he exposes lies between connection and isolation. Hypercommunication promises community, yet produces loneliness. The cult of productivity promises fulfillment, yet generates exhaustion. Freedom becomes indistinguishable from compulsion, because the demand to optimize oneself never rests. In an age of social media exhibitionism and algorithmic governance, his reflections sharpen. The demand to be visible, to be positive, to be productive intensifies. Even leisure becomes instrumentalized. The soul grows tired not from oppression, but from excess. His work invites restraint. It asks us to rediscover slowness, interiority, and the courage to encounter limits. In recovering negativity, the pause, the no, the other, we may recover a more humane form of freedom.